Chapter 99. Palmer sat down again and looked at the 5 questions on the blackboard. He looked at Amy confidently and said, "I'll count to 3, and then we'll start at the same time. Whoever finishes first wins." 1, 64, 42, 72, 48, 63. Done. Amy looked back at the blackboard and calmly reported 5 numbers. Palmer had just finished counting to 3, and before he could close his mouth and start copying the questions on the paper, Amy had already finished. The classroom suddenly fell silent. The children didn't know if Amy had calculated correctly, but she was much faster than Palmer. Palmer hadn't even started, and Amy had already reported the answers. So now they all looked at Teacher Luna, wondering if Amy had said the correct answers. "You're not lying, are you?" Palmer looked at Amy and asked hesitantly. "I calculated it carefully," Amy said seriously and also looked at Luna. 64, 42, 72, 48, 63. All correct. Luna looked at the questions on the blackboard and said the answers one by one. They were exactly the same as Amy's. She was so surprised that she couldn't help but raise her voice a little. This level of arithmetic was not difficult for her, but even she had to think about it in her head before she could come up with an answer. But just now, Amy had said the correct answers just by looking at the questions. This speed was amazing. She was a genius. "Amy is so good," Daphne exclaimed softly. She said what the other children were thinking. They had thought that Palmer was the best, but now it seemed that Amy was still better. "She's so scary. I can't play with her anymore. People who are good at studying are all crazy." Ignazio looked horrified and shook his head regretfully. "I lost." Palmer was silent for a while and nodded seriously. His father had said that as a man, win or lose, he had to be gracious, especially when it came to women. Although he was often beaten by his mother and didn't dare to fight back, so he made this up to comfort himself, Palmer still felt that it was quite right. "Yeah, you lost." Amy also nodded, but she didn't look too proud. Instead, she felt that it was only natural. Of course, this attitude made Palmer feel even more depressed. Amazing. This was the only thought many of the children had when they looked at Amy. It turned out that the little girl in shabby clothes had suddenly become so awesome. She was even more awesome than Palmer. The multiplication table of the Great Celestial Empire is indeed powerful. Meg smiled and looked at the little boy. He was quite gentlemanly and looked a little familiar, but he couldn't remember where he had seen him before. At this time, the bell rang, signaling the end of class. The children immediately put the matter to the back of their minds. Some of them could not wait for Teacher Luna to announce the end of class so that they could go out and play. "All right, class dismissed." Luna had a lot of questions in her mind, so she didn't delay the class. She held Amy's hand and walked out of the classroom. She looked at Meg and said, "Mr. Meg, there are some questions I want to ask you. If you have time, can we talk in my office?" "Sure." Meg smiled and nodded. He had something to ask her anyway. "Mr. Meg, did you teach Amy how to calculate?" When they arrived at the office, Luna gave Amy a candy and let her sit on a small chair to play with. She couldn't help but ask Meg about her doubts. How did Amy learn how to calculate these questions so quickly in such a short time? She had taught Amy many multiplication tables before, but because there were too many of them, she couldn't remember them all. At that level, she definitely couldn't answer them all. "I taught Amy a new multiplication table. At the same time, I changed the algorithm. The calculation process has become simpler, and we can get the answer directly." Meg had no intention of hiding it. Firstly, he trusted Luna more. Secondly, there was no need to hide such things. Let the multiplication table become popular in this world, let everyone memorize the multiplication table. Just thinking about it was an interesting thing. The integration of the various races was the most direct method of war, but it was also the most problematic. If they could use culture to promote the integration, it would be a good thing. A new algorithm? Luna's eyes lit up. She had thought that Meg had been teaching Amy a lot at home. If the simpler algorithm that Meg mentioned really existed, then it would be a revolutionary step for the mathematics world. Her hands couldn't help but tremble a little. She looked at Meg and asked seriously, "Mr. Meg, Is the algorithm you mentioned universal? It should be universal. Meg nodded. The algorithm had been popularized in China for so many years, so he didn't have to worry about it being universal. However, if he wanted to popularize it in this world, it was obviously not realistic to rely on Luna, a mathematics teacher. At the very least, it would have to be promoted by an organization at the level of the Grey Temple. Teacher Luna, Father is really super awesome, Amy, who was sitting at the side with Ugly Duckling in her arms, said with pride on her little face. Mr. Meg, although it's a little abrupt, can I take a look at the new algorithm that you've derived? Luna looked at Meg sincerely, and said, if you want to publish it, perhaps I can help you. My grandfather is one of the officials in charge of education in the Roth Empire. Although it's inconvenient to reveal his name, he has always been dedicated to popularizing mathematics. It's just that the existing algorithms are too complicated. There aren't many people who have the patience to learn and master them. Even in Chaos School, only about half of the students who graduate from the primary school can pass mathematics every year. If your algorithm is really simpler and more applicable than the existing algorithms, I'm sure he'll be more than happy to help popularize it and leave your name in the history of mathematics forever. It was naturally a good thing to leave his name in history, but Meg didn't want to be too high-profile now. The name Meg Alex should be a thorn in the hearts of many people in Rodu. If he suddenly poked out, many people would be agitated. However, Luna's identity was a little surprising. He had thought that she was just the daughter of an ordinary noble family in the Roth Empire. He didn't expect that her grandfather was an official in charge of education. In the past, Meg Alex had mainly interacted with people from the military, so he didn't know much about civil officials. Now that he thought about it, he only had a vague impression of the surname Ferd. It seemed that there was an old man who had drunk with him at a palace banquet with this surname. However, judging from the way he drank, he was quite bold. He wondered if he was related to Luna. Millimeterham, I can write the algorithm for Miss Luna, but if you want to sign it, I'd like to sign it as Mammy. Is that all right? Meg nodded with a smile. Signing his name was naturally the best way to advertise. However, he didn't know what the students who were taught Mammy's multiplication table every day would think if he used the restaurant's name for such an epoch-making algorithm and multiplication table. Chapter 100. Mag nodded. He asked for a pen and paper, and drew out a complete table of the 9 by 9 multiplication formula. In order to explain it in detail, he wrote down the multiplication terms in reverse, and explained the decimal system algorithm in detail at the same time. The sexagesimal system was currently used on the Norland continent, and there were more than 1,700 terms in the multiplication table. If the multiplication and division of more than 2 digits were involved, the calculation would become extremely complicated. If one could do the division of more than 3 digits, they could be regarded as a mathematical expert. Therefore, if they wanted to implement the multiplication table, the first thing they had to change was this complicated system. History had proven that the decimal system invented by the wise men of China was the simplest and most universal system. Coupled with the multiplication table, it was enough to solve most of the mathematical problems in life. That was an era when the ancient people of China crushed the world in arithmetic. Luna watched from the side. Her eyes became brighter and brighter, and her mouth opened wider and wider. As an arithmetic teacher who grew up in a family of mathematicians, her eyesight was naturally not something that Amy could compare with. Although she still didn't understand the concept of the decimal system very well in some aspects, Meg's explanation was enough for her to see that this system was extraordinary. Coupled with the highly regular multiplication table, she saw endless possibilities. Luna looked at Meg, who had put down his pen, and said seriously, Mr. Meg, although I'm not sure if this system and the decimal system of yours can be used in all situations, I can't deny that you are a genius. I'm not a genius. I just know a little more. Meg shook his head with a smile. This was the wisdom of the wise men of the past. It was a clash of the top and bottom for this world. He wasn't sure what kind of impact this piece of paper would have on this world. I'll get someone to send this information to Rodu as soon as possible. I don't have the ability to evaluate its value, nor can I verify it completely. However, I can be sure that this will definitely cause a huge uproar in the field of arithmetic on the Norland continent. The name Mammy will not be forgotten. Luna felt more and more that Meg was humble and polite. Not only was he a good cook, but he was also a genius in arithmetic. Even for such a discovery, he had to add Amy's name to it. It could be said that he doted on his daughter to the extreme. This man is really interesting and curious. Is there anything that he can't do? Amy looked at Meg with her eyes shining. Even teacher Luna said that father was a genius. Father was indeed amazing. Meg nodded with a smile. Anyway, there shouldn't be any concept of royalties or invention patents in this world. He didn't want to make money from this. He would just treat it as an awesome advertisement for his restaurant. Of course, the purpose of his visit today was not to teach Amy the multiplication table. His main purpose was to find a magic teacher for her. So, he got down to business. Miss Luna, I brought Amy here today not only because she wants to see you, but also because I want to ask if the magic teachers in Chaos School will accept paid private lessons. Amy is very interested in magic, but she's not old enough to enter the school yet. So, I want to find a teacher to teach her some basic magic knowledge in advance. I'm afraid that's not possible. The teachers in Chaos School can't teach outside for paid lessons. If the school finds out, their teaching license will be revoked. Luna shook her head awkwardly. She looked at Amy and said, also, Amy can't officially enter the school until next year. Even after she enters the school, she will have to wait until she's a little older before she has the opportunity to learn magic knowledge. After the professional magic teachers in the school confirm that she has magic talent, they will specially gather together to teach her. She didn't expect that just because Amy wanted to learn magic, Meg would personally come here to find a private teacher. I see. All right, thank you, Miss Luna, for clearing my doubts. Meg was a little disappointed to hear that. However, this was a rule, so there was nothing he could do. His original plan had fallen through. It seemed that he had to think of another way. Luna looked at Amy with a smile and said, actually, Amy is still young. There's no need to rush to learn magic. It's quite boring. Amy shook her head and said, Teacher Luna, I really like magic. I think it's super interesting. Meg and Amy played in Luna's office for a while before leaving. When they walked out of the school gate, the old guard and the orc both stared at them with wide eyes. They didn't know when the father and daughter had entered the school. I have to send it to grandfather as soon as possible. Perhaps this will be an important turning point in promoting arithmetic on a large scale. Grandfather will definitely be interested in it. Luna looked at Meg's back from the office window, and she couldn't hide the excitement on her face. She quickly walked to the table, picked up the 2 pieces of paper, and put them away carefully before walking out. Father, are we going home now? Amy asked as she held one of Meg's fingers and looked up at Meg. She was in a very good mood today. Her singing had been praised by everyone, and she had even beaten Palmer with the multiplication table that her father had taught her. She felt as if she wasn't inferior to them at all. No. Since we're out, let's have a good day. We'll have lunch outside. Meg shook his head. It was indeed a little boring to stay in the restaurant every day. It was lunchtime now, so he took Amy to a popular barbecue restaurant on the side of the road. He was going to try out the dishes of this popular restaurant in this world. Ugly Duckling was sleeping in the basket, and Meg had covered it with a towel. No one would know what was in the basket if it didn't make a sound. As soon as they walked in, the aroma of barbecue wafted toward them. However, Meg couldn't help but furrow his brows. The aroma was mixed with the rank odor of mutton. Furthermore, the aroma of spices was too pungent. It was a smell even more intense than pepper. Father, are we going to eat barbecue? Amy's eyes lit up. She had never eaten barbecue before. Yes. Meg, who had been a little hesitant about whether to leave or not, nodded when he saw Amy's eagerness. He picked a seat by the window and sat down. This barbecue restaurant was one of the most popular in the Aden Square. It was only slightly less popular than Friar's Tavern. People usually had to wait in line to eat their barbecue at night. Even at noon, the restaurant with more than 20 tables was almost full. Meg glanced at the plate in front of the customer at the table next to him. The mutton had been cut into pieces. It was dark in color, and there was a layer of blackened sauce and seasoning powder on the surface. The two customers were eating the beef on their plates, chatting and laughing happily. It seemed that they were quite satisfied with the food. The sauce is not even applied evenly at all. The seasoning powder is not at the right time. The charcoal temperature is too high, and the barbecue time is too long. Is this barbecue skill at the level of an assistant chef? With just one look, Meg already couldn't help but want to complain. Phew. Hold it in. Smile. You're a restaurant owner now. If you get recognized for complaining, you'll be seen as a troublemaker. Meg slowly calmed himself down. Then, he opened the menu and ordered 2 servings of the restaurant's specialty barbecue mutton and beef. The price of one serving was 88 copper coins. It was the most expensive item on the menu. Chapter 101. The 2 portions of roast meat Meg ordered were quickly served, and the waiter even gave them a pot of tea for free. Father, can we start now? Amy's eyes lit up as she looked at the roast lamb chop in front of her. Go ahead. Be careful, it's hot. Meg nodded with a smile as he looked at the plate of sliced roast steak in front of him. The roast steak was a bit between a kebab and a Western roast steak. It was called a kebab, but it wasn't skewered with bamboo skewers. It was called a steak, but it was cut open and roasted. The rank odor of the beef was slightly weaker, but the sauce was still very thick. The seasoning powder was sprinkled too early, and the surface of the meat was a little blackened after being roasted over the fire for too long. The smell of the seasoning powder was a little pungent. Meg was used to eating exquisite food, so his first impression of the roast beef was a little bad. Even when he occasionally went to roadside stalls to buy kebabs, they wouldn't serve such a thing to people. Okay. Amy nodded. She picked up the fork on the table and picked up a piece of lamb chop with some difficulty. She brought it to her mouth and blew on it a few times. Then she opened her mouth and took a bite. She chewed happily, looking very cute. Is it good? Mag, who didn't have much of an appetite, asked with a smile as he looked at Amy, who was eating with relish. His interest was piqued. Amy nodded. After swallowing the meat in her mouth, she looked at Meg expectantly and asked, Yes, it's not bad. But of course, it's not as good as Father's rainbow fried rice and Ruggiamo. But when will Father be able to cook roast meat? I'll learn in the future. Meg nodded with a smile. He was also looking forward to eating kebabs with Amy in his restaurant, but he didn't know when the system would release a recipe for roast meat. This was not something he could control. Maybe I can ask Amy to wait for the customers to come before we eat. Everything she eats is very delicious. She can taste the deliciousness of a pancake. This is more attractive than any yelling. Looking at Amy eating with relish, Meg thought to himself that he should try the new dish when it was released. There was nothing better than Amy's cooking. They had been out for the whole morning, so they were indeed a little hungry. Although the appearance was a little unsatisfactory, the way Amy ate still added a lot of points to the dish. At least, it gave Meg the desire to try it. He picked up a piece of steak and put it in his mouth. After chewing it a few times, his brows furrowed. The meat must have been roasted on the grill for a long time. In order to be ready to be served at any time, they did not consider the problem of the meat being roasted for too long and the problem of the meat being hard and dry. The taste of the sauce was a little hard to describe in a few words. It was hard to tell how many kinds of seasonings were used. Pepper, sugar, salt, ginger. The ratio was a little random. It was quite stimulating, but it also completely covered the original sweetness of the beef. One could only feel that one's mouth and tongue were a little numb from the stimulation of all kinds of seasonings. It could only be said that diners who liked strong flavors might like it more. They would give up on the pursuit of delicious taste and just enjoy the stimulation. If it were in his previous life, Meg would have immediately stood up to pay the bill and left after tasting it. However, looking at Amy, who was eating happily, he silently put down his fork. It was Amy's first time eating barbecued meat. Seeing how happy she was, how could he bear to spoil her mood? He picked up the tea on the table and poured her a cup and took a sip. This free tea made Meg's eyes light up. It had a slightly sweet and sour taste, a little like lemon juice. The color was clear with a little orange, similar to the color of honey water. Very quickly, the spiciness in his mouth was suppressed. He couldn't help but pour another cup and take a few sips. "What kind of water is this?" Meg asked the waiter passing by. "Sir, this is water made from lime fruit," the waiter replied with a smile. "Okay, thank you." Meg nodded. Although he didn't know what kind of fruit the lime fruit was, the water it was made from was indeed delicious. He could go in and take a look when he passed by a fruit shop later. Perhaps he could also serve the customer a cup of lime water. After all, after eating fried rice and meat, the customer's mouth was a little dry. There were even customers who asked him for plain water earlier. "Host, the system solemnly reminds you that the restaurant is not allowed to sell any food other than the menu provided by the system, including drink." The system's voice sounded in Meg's mind. "Who said I was going to sell it?" Meg smiled. "I was going to give it to you as a gift." A line of ellipses silently floated in Meg's mind. After a while, the system's roar sounded, "Host, your behavior is undoubtedly a serious provocation to the system. You are degrading the restaurant's style. You are giving up on yourself. You are." "System, do you sell higher-grade lime fruit?" Meg calmly interrupted. "Not for sale for now," the system said in a somewhat complicated tone after hearing the roar. "Then it's fine. You're not selling it, so why can't I buy it?" Meg curled his lips, but after thinking for a while, he said, "Forget it. I don't have the recipe or the experience bag anyway. I'll buy a few first and try them myself." He recalled that in his previous life, he had tried making lemon water on a whim at home several times. No matter if he added honey or sugar, the taste was indescribable. Meg felt that it was unlikely that he could develop a drinkable lime water by himself. After pouring a cup of water for Amy and eating 2 more steaks, Meg chose to give up. He would go home and make himself a plate of Yeongju fried rice. Compared to Yeongju fried rice, this steak tasted like wax. "Father, you're not eating anymore?" Amy asked curiously when she saw Meg's plate full. "Yes, I'm full." Meg nodded. "Then Amy can help Father finish the rest." Amy looked at the plate of steak in front of Meg with shining eyes. "Okay." Meg switched the 2 plates and looked at Amy dotingly. It was the little girl's first time eating barbecue, and she seemed to like it very much. This should represent the average level of barbecue in this world. She had some grilling skills and knew how to use all kinds of seasonings and sauces, but it was too rough and not delicate enough. "Father, today's barbecue is so delicious. I didn't know barbecue tasted like this," Amy said happily after paying the bill and leaving. "Father will make you barbecue 100 times better than this in the future." Meg smiled and patted Amy's head. This level of barbecue couldn't even be considered as entry-level. It had to be crispy on the outside and tender on the inside. With one bite, the rich sauce and tender beef would blend perfectly. It was delicious and chewy. Only then could it be considered a truly delicious beef kebab. At noon, the customers who waited outside Amy's for a long time and didn't hear a response from the door for a long time all left in disappointment. Today, they really saw Meg as a man of his word. He said he wouldn't open the door, and he really went out to have fun. They'd better not come over on their days off in the future. Mag took Amy and Ugly Duckling, who had just woken up, to play in the square for 2 hours. After the 2 little ones had played to their heart's content, he bought a few limes on the way, and took the 2 little ones home. Chapter 102. It was a girl who had collapsed at the door. She was wearing a grey linen shirt and trousers, and her left hand, which was resting on her head, was pointing in the direction of the restaurant. Her blonde hair was tied into a side ponytail, and only the side of her face could be seen. She looked very thin and frail, and the loose clothes made her look even more petite. "What's wrong with this big sister?" Amy looked at the girl worriedly, and Ugly Duckling meowed in her arms. "Why did she faint here?" Meg was also a little puzzled. He squatted down to test her. Her breathing was a little weak, but it was still normal. There were no obvious injuries on her body, so if it wasn't some kind of illness, then she most likely fainted from hunger. Furthermore, There was a pair of small golden horns on her head, which looked a little like antlers. She didn't seem to be an ordinary girl, but he didn't know if she was a demon or an orc. Elves didn't seem to have horns. Right at this moment, the girl suddenly murmured, "Roast. Roast goose, roast goose. Father, she really is a little girl who sells matches. She's grown into a big sister." Amy's eyes lit up, and she looked at her with pity. "Let's help her. She's so pitiful, but Ugly Duckling is still young. Meow, meow." Ugly Duckling seemed to have sensed that something was wrong, and it began to meow uneasily. "All right, then let's help her." Meg looked around. There weren't many passers-by here, so he didn't know how long this girl had been lying here. Furthermore, if she was picked up by someone with bad intentions, who knew what would happen to this thin and frail girl? He got up and opened the door, and placed the small basket on the table inside. He then reached out to help her up slowly, and walked into the restaurant. Meg found it a little difficult to carry Amy now, so he naturally couldn't carry her like a gentleman. Fortunately, this girl was very light, and he helped her slowly into the restaurant. He pulled out a chair for her to sit down, and leaned against the back of the chair. "What a beautiful big sister." Amy's eyes lit up as she looked at the golden-haired girl. Meg was also a little surprised as he looked at the girl. Her facial features were delicate, and she looked to be only 17 or 18 years old. However, her two thin eyebrows were like two small, straight swords that were raised to both sides, adding a different kind of toughness to her originally gentle and beautiful face. However, her face was frighteningly pale, and her lips were a little dry. It was unknown how long she had not eaten or drunk anything. She was curled up in the chair, looking like a kitten, which made people feel sorry for her. Could it be a dragon? Meg looked at the pair of antlers on the girl's head. They looked a bit like dragon horns. He muttered to himself and walked to the kitchen. He poured a cup of warm water and slowly fed it to her, but she still didn't wake up. "Father, is this big sister all right?" Amy asked worriedly as she looked at Meg. "She should be hungry. I'll go make her a plate of rainbow fried rice. She can eat it when she wakes up." Meg nodded. If she didn't wake up, he might have to cook porridge to feed her. "Yes, yes. Father, you're so good. Meg wants to be a good person like you." Amy looked at Meg with admiration on her little face. "Yes, we have to be kind and help as much as we can. However, the most important thing is to ensure our own safety. We can't force ourselves." Meg looked at Amy and nodded with a smile. "I understand." Amy nodded seriously. Meg went into the kitchen to make the fried rice. Amy sat opposite the golden-haired girl with Ugly Duckling in her arms, looking at her worriedly. Ugly Duckling stretched out its little paws and scratched the edge of the table, making a soft rustling sound. The golden-haired girl, who was half curled up in the chair, gradually calmed down after drinking some water. She frowned as if she wanted to wake up, but she seemed to lack the motivation to do so, and still didn't wake up. An alluring aroma slowly wafted out of the half-open kitchen. Ugly Duckling, who was nestled in Amy's arms, stopped scratching the edge of the table, and stuck its little head out to look in the direction of the kitchen. Its big blue eyes were full of desire. "Don't look. It's not for you anyway," Amy said calmly. "Meow, meow." Ugly Duckling was instantly disheartened. It meowed a few times in annoyance before snuggling back into Amy's arms and closing its eyes. Out of sight, out of mind. As the alluring aroma of the fried rice wafted out, the golden-haired girl's nose twitched slightly, and her eyelids trembled as if she were struggling to open her eyes. "Father, this big sister seems to be waking up." Amy looked at the golden-haired girl, and rushed into the kitchen with excitement. Yarbemia seemed to have been startled by Amy's voice, and she slowly opened her eyes. Her left eye was golden, while her right eye was black. Her pupils slowly focused, and she was greeted by the sight of an exquisitely decorated and luxurious restaurant. There were beautiful murals, beautiful chandeliers, clean and bright dining tables, and an adorable half-elf girl sitting across from her, holding an orange kitten in her arms. Where am I? Am I dreaming?" Yarbemia was a little dazed. She only remembered that she was in a daze from hunger, and before she fainted, she saw a beautiful restaurant. It was like a palace, a restaurant that shouldn't have appeared in the Aden Square. After that, she lost consciousness. Now that she opened her eyes, she was sitting in that restaurant. Everything around her was so beautiful, and even the half-elf girl sitting across from her was so beautiful and adorable. The orange kitten in her arms was so furry and adorable. She had to be dreaming. What made her even more concerned was the alluring fragrance floating in the air. What kind of delicious food could emit such a fragrance? Her stomach was growling, and she couldn't help but swallow her saliva. With some effort, she looked in the direction of the kitchen. A tall, thin, and handsome uncle was walking towards her with a plate of brightly colored food. There was a kind smile on his face. She didn't think that she would be able to have such a beautiful dream before she starved to death. Of course, Yarbemia's attention was completely drawn to the alluring aroma wafting from the plate of food. All types of colorful ingredients had been sliced into even pieces, and it was as if a rainbow had been plucked from the sky before being stir-fried. The most prominent aroma was the egg aroma, and all of the other aromas mixed together to create a harmonious and alluring aroma. Dig in. Meg gently placed the plate in front of Yarbemia with a smile. Even though this girl was still a little dazed, it was a good thing that she was awake. At the very least, she could eat on her own. Her gold and black eyes also surprised him a little. It was a very rare color for her eyes. Thank you. Even though she felt like she was dreaming, Yarbemia still thanked him politely before scooping up a spoonful of fried rice from the center of the plate. The golden eggs were perfectly wrapped around the grains of rice. Every ingredient was cut into the exact same size, and the surface was glistening with a little bit of oil. Was he going to stir-fry so many ingredients together? She had never seen such a cooking method before. Chapter 103. The egg melted almost immediately in her mouth, and the soft ham melted into the rice. There was also the taste of shrimp. All kinds of flavors were contained in this bite. The flavors of all the ingredients melted in her mouth and assaulted her taste buds. Even after she swallowed, the fragrance of the rice still lingered in her mouth. After swallowing it, the delicious taste turned into a warm current that slowly flowed through her body. Her entire body was nourished, and every part of her flesh and blood was cheering, making her feel much better all of a sudden. How can there be such delicious food in this world? No, it can only be found in dreams. But it's really delicious. Yarbemia's eyes were wide open. One spoonful was not enough. She couldn't help but take another big spoonful. Feeling the delicious taste in her mouth, she felt as if she was soaking in a hot spring, dispelling the cold and hunger. Spoonful after spoonful, she couldn't stop. Poor little sister. Even if she grows up, she won't be able to sell a single match. Amy looked at Yarbemia with pity and sighed in her heart. Although she didn't get to eat the roast goose, she should be very happy to eat the delicious rainbow fried rice made by her father. How long has she been hungry? Mag couldn't help but smile as he watched Yarbemia devour the fried rice like a tornado. A giant dragon shouldn't be so miserable. If she's not an orc, she's most likely a half-dragon. Mag thought to himself, she's a half-dragon. Mag nodded. The situation of being half-dragon was somewhat awkward. Although this girl was quite beautiful, the chances of her not being able to find a job were quite high. After all, most shop owners didn't want to attract unnecessary trouble because of a half-dragon. Ding! The spoon fell on the empty plate and made a soft sound. Yarbemia was stunned for a moment. Only then did she realize that she had finished the plate of fried rice. Looking at the few grains of rice left on the plate, she couldn't help but pick up the plate and lick it. Then she put down the plate with satisfaction. A warm and comfortable feeling permeated his entire body, and the fragrance of the rice still lingered in his mouth. His spirit, which had been dispirited due to hunger, had now completely recovered, and his hunger had also been dispelled. And this was all because of the delicious fried rice just now. Are all the things I eat in my dreams so magical? Then I hope I never wake up from this dream, Yarbemia said to herself happily. She then looked up at Meg and smiled. Uncle, I want another serving of that delicious food. Aya, what a cute little elf. Let big sister pinch you. He then stroked Amy's face and stroked Ugly Duckling's head. And you're such a cute kitten. You're so much cuter than the black and white cats outside. Do you still think you're dreaming? Meg stared blankly for a moment and couldn't help but smile. However, after eating a plate of Yangju fried rice, the girl's face regained some color. When she smiled, her two small canine teeth were exposed. She was quite bright and lovely. Amy shook her head earnestly at the sight of Yabemia's smiling face, and pointed behind her as she said, "Big sister, even though it's daytime right now, you're not dreaming. If you don't believe me, look out the window. That's the Aiden Square." Meow. Ugly Duckling was a little unhappy that someone other than Amy was stroking its head, and it curled up in Amy's arms. "It's not a dream." Yabemia's hand instantly froze. She looked up at Meg, then at the innocent Amy, and then at the slightly hostile little orange kitten. The air seemed to have frozen in that instant. The awkward silence lasted for a long while. Yabemia slowly turned around and looked behind her. Outside the transparent glass window was the Aiden Square under the sunlight. An old man was doing exercises in the square with a long sword in his hand. Two pigeons flew down and were looking for insects to eat. Everything was so simple and real. It's really not a dream. Yabemia's neck was a little stiff as she turned around. She looked at the plate in front of her, which had been licked to the point where she could see her own reflection. Her face reddened as she suddenly stood up from her chair. She lowered her head uneasily and wrung her hands, not knowing where to place them. She said with embarrassment, I'm sorry. I thought I was dreaming. It's okay, big sister. When I first ate Father's rainbow fried rice, I also felt like I was dreaming because it was so delicious." Amy shook her head and comforted her. "But I didn't expect you to still be like this when you've grown up." Meg looked at Yabemia, who was a little embarrassed and wanted to find a hole to hide in. He smiled gently and said, "It's okay. What's your name? You haven't eaten in a long time, right? I saw you passed out in front of the restaurant, so I helped you in. It's good to see that you're fine. I'm the owner of this restaurant. You can call me Mr. Mac." Hearing Amy and Meg's comforting words and seeing the gentle smile on Meg's face, Yabemia's panicked heart calmed down a little. This father and daughter pair seemed to be good people. However, when she thought about her situation, her expression became a little sad. She nodded and said, "My name is Yabemia. I haven't eaten in 3 days. The owner of the restaurant kicked me out and didn't pay me. I've been looking for a job in the Aiden Square for 3 days, but because I'm a half-dragon, no one hired me to do the dishes. When I walked in front of your restaurant today, I thought I was dreaming. How could there be such a beautiful restaurant in this world? Then I fainted." "You're a half-dragon." Meg raised his eyebrows. He didn't understand how the races in this world had evolved. They didn't even have reproductive isolation. Furthermore, wasn't there a huge difference between giant dragons and humans? If it were a combination of giant dragons and forest trolls, then perhaps he could try to understand. However, from Yabemia's story, it was quite clear that it wasn't easy for half-dragons to survive in this world. Even though half of her dragon bloodline ran through her veins, she couldn't even find a job as a dishwasher. As a result, she almost starved to death. However, if she was a waitress, she's so pitiful. Amy looked at Yabemia with a pitiful expression. She then turned to Meg and asked, "Father, didn't you say that we need a waitress at our restaurant this morning? Can't we just ask big sister Mia to stay? Do you need a waitress at your restaurant?" Yabemia's eyes immediately lit up upon hearing this. However, she then looked down at the lavish decor of the restaurant, and a dejected look appeared on her face. Even those lowly restaurants didn't want her. This restaurant was so high-end, how could it possibly accept a half-dragon as a waitress? Chapter 104. Yes, I need a waitress, but I haven't found anyone yet. You said you've worked in a restaurant before? Meg nodded with a smile. What Amy said was exactly what he was thinking, but he didn't directly agree to let Yabemia stay. The restaurant didn't need a vase, and it didn't need extra staff. Yes, I've been helping out in the kitchen with my mother since I was 9 years old. My mother passed away when I was 12, and I've been helping out in the kitchen since then. Until a few days ago. Yabemia nodded. She was a little nervous and excited when she heard Meg's question, but her expression gradually became gloomy, as if there was something she couldn't say. Then you have a lot of experience. But the waitress I'm hiring now may have a lot of work to do. Her main job is to receive customers, take orders, serve dishes, clean the table, and clean the restaurant. It will be very busy during opening hours. Are you sure you can do it? Meg didn't ask any more questions. He looked into Yarbemia's eyes and asked, "Receive customers?" A trace of panic flashed across Yarbemia's face, but there was also a trace of expectation. For so many years, she had been hiding in the kitchen like an invisible person. Once, the chef asked her to serve a dish to a customer. She carefully served the dish, but when the owner saw it, he was so angry that he smashed a hole in her head with a spoon, causing her to bleed profusely. She was only 13 years old at that time. Since then, she had never dared to step out of the kitchen during opening hours. She also wanted to wear clean and beautiful clothes and serve the customers plates of delicacies with a smile on her face. She also wanted to clean up the table under the admiring gazes of the customers. However, these things were impossible for a half-dragon like her. No restaurant would hire a half-dragon as a waitress. I've never cooked before. And if I serve dishes, the customers may be unhappy. Yarbemia said without confidence. If you're worried that the customers will be unhappy because of your identity, that's not a problem in my restaurant. Amy's back is the symbol of my restaurant. She is my greatest pride. In my eyes, your race is no different from Amy's, and you won't be a burden to the restaurant, Meg said with a smile, taking a bag of Ruggiamo from the side and gently putting it on the table. Seeing the girl's self-abasement, Meg was suddenly reminded of Amy from a few days ago. However, Yarbemia had been through a lot more, so she was hurt more deeply, which made him feel some compassion for her. Yarbemia stared at Meg with her mouth slightly agape. This was the first time she had heard something like this. It was the first time someone had told her that being a half-dragon was not a problem. His gaze then fell upon the bag on the table, and he discovered that it was the back of a half-elf little girl. It was none other than the adorable little girl sitting across from him. Mag was using this as the restaurant's logo. How bold and risky was that? 2 years ago, in the Aden Square, a drunken demon smashed up a restaurant because there was a half-orc waiter there. The owner was beaten to a pulp, and died not long after. The restaurant's business was booming, and it closed down completely just like that. Although the demon was later punished by the Grey Temple and was still in prison, the culprit was the half-orc waitress. Almost overnight, all of the half-human waitresses in the Aden Square lost their jobs. Even the kitchen helper like her had her salary cut in half, and she didn't even have enough to cover her daily expenses. However, Meg was using the back of a half-elf as the restaurant's logo, and now he was saying that he didn't care about her identity. This made her feel the love Meg had for Amy, as well as the respect he had for half-humans. To them, treating everyone equally was even more precious than pity. What I want to test is whether you have the ability to do this job, and whether you have the courage to try, Meg continued. Yarbemia hesitated momentarily before mustering her courage, and nodding as she said, "If possible, I want to give it a try." "That's more like it. Father is very easy to talk to, so don't be scared, big sister MIA. Amy held onto Ugly Duckling's little paw with an expectant look on her little face. If big sister MIA worked at the restaurant, then she would have someone to play with in the future. Yes. Yarbemia nodded. This was the first time that someone had encouraged her after her mother passed away, and she felt a sense of warmth in her heart. Very good. A smile also appeared on Meg's face. He didn't want to give her a job out of charity. Instead, he wanted her to fight for a job that she could do with dignity. That would make her happier and more confident. Then let's begin. Due to the fact that there will be a lot of customers during the restaurant's opening hours, in order to increase efficiency, we have to take orders and serve the dishes quickly. The basic requirement is to remember each and every customer's order and request. Of course, if you're literate, you can write it down in a notebook, but I want you to take as little time as possible, Meg said as he looked at Yarbemia. Yarbemia thought for a moment before nodding, and said, "My mother taught me to read when I was a child, and I have a pretty good memory. If it's just remembering the order of each customer's order, then it shouldn't be a problem." "All right, let's give it a try." Meg didn't expect her to be so confident, but he didn't rush to make a decision. He walked to the counter, took out a small notebook and a pen, and put them aside. He took 4 pieces of paper, tore them into 16 pieces, and marked them with a serial number. Then, he wrote down 2 or 3 customers' requests on each piece of paper, and placed the 16 pieces of paper on the 16 tables in a messy order. The first table at the entrance is table number 1, and the other tables are table number 2, table number 3. The serial number on the paper is the order of the order, and each customer's request is written on it. You have 10 minutes to memorize these things, whether you write them down or memorize them in a notebook. Meg looked at the clock on the wall and said, "Begin." Yarbemia looked at the paper money on the table next to her, and walked to table number 1 empty-handed without any hesitation. "It's done." 5 minutes later, Yarbemia stood in front of Meg, and her eyes were filled with confidence. "Then tell me the order of the order." Meg was a little surprised, but he didn't take the paper. His shorthand skills had won him the first prize in a contest in junior high, so naturally, he could remember everything he wrote down clearly. 2 Ruggiamos for table 3. Yarbemia looked at Mag and listed the orders one by one unhurriedly. She paused for a moment, but then she went on and finished all the orders fluently. Table 3 ordered 2 Ruggiamos. "Father, is everything correct?" Amy asked curiously as she looked at Meg. Chapter 105. Yes, the order and order were all correct. Both the efficiency and accuracy are very good. Meg nodded with a smile. Yarbemia's performance had indeed surprised him, but at the same time, he was very satisfied. This was the kind of employee he wanted. Sister Mia is so amazing. Amy clapped her little hands and looked at Yarbemia with admiration. "No, I'm not amazing." Yarbemia quickly waved her hands, but her slightly red face was full of joy. She had a good memory since she was young, but she had always been ridiculed by the kitchen staff for being useless. She didn't expect to be worshipped by Amy and praised by Meg today. This feeling of being praised and appreciated was something she had never experienced before, and it gave her some confidence in herself. Other than memory, high-intensity work also requires good physical strength. Otherwise, you won't be able to finish a day's work. Can you do it? Meg looked at Yarbemia's small body under the loose clothes. When he helped her in, she probably weighed less than 40 kilograms. "Of course I can." Yarbemia suddenly puffed out her chest and pushed the loose clothes up. Unexpectedly, she was quite big. However, she quickly realized that her actions were a little unsightly, so she quickly relaxed and nodded with a red face. "Although I look a little skinny, I'm very strong. When I was in the kitchen, I could move a piece of pork by myself. I could work from morning to night. My physical strength is better than the men who help me in the kitchen." Meg pointed at the log table in front of him and said, "Then, try this table." The table was made of thick wood and weighed at least 100 kilograms. It was a little difficult for him to move it. "Like this." Yarbemia walked over and grabbed the edge of the table with both hands. The wooden table was lifted 20 centimeters off the ground. She looked at Meg with a relaxed expression. Meg raised his eyebrows. This girl looked thin and weak, but her strength was amazing. It was much harder to lift a table by grabbing the edge of the table than it was to lift 100 kilograms. He nodded and said, "It's done." It seemed that her small body was caused by not eating enough for a long time. As long as she had enough nutrition, her plasticity would be good. "Wow. Sister Mia, you're so strong," Amy praised as she watched Yarbemia put the table back in its original position. Yarbemia smiled a little embarrassedly. She was a little unhappy with the nickname of Super Strength Girl in the kitchen. She didn't expect Amy to like it so much. Meg looked at Yarbemia with satisfaction. He had a good memory and good stamina. He was very close to the ideal employee. He looked at Yarbemia, who was still a little restrained, and said with a smile, "I hope to bring a comfortable dining experience to most of the customers. The philosophy of the restaurant is kindness, distance, equality." There was no need to be respectful to every guest, but at the same time keeping a distance, being able to put on a kind smile would make the guests feel comfortable, and treating every guest equally was the most basic respect. "Now, can you please give me a sincere smile?" Kindness, distance, equality. Yarbemia, who was a little nervous, fell into deep thought after hearing Meg's words. Equality was something she had never come into contact with before. Ever since she was born, she had been living in an unequal environment. The previous restaurant served the elves first, then the demons and trolls, and finally the humans. As for the half-races, they were directly rejected. There was no equality at all. However, Mag had said that he was going to treat all of his customers equally, and that should include half-breeds like her. If she could serve half-breeds in his restaurant, it would be a wonderful experience. With that in mind, a smile appeared on Yabemia's face. She was like a little white flower blooming on the dry ground in winter. It wasn't beautiful, but it was very clean, and it seemed to purify one's soul. If you're willing, I think you can come to work tomorrow. Meg looked at Yabemia and said seriously. Her smile, which revealed a pair of small canine teeth, was delicate and cute. Most importantly, it was very infectious. Just looking at it would make one's mood better. This was a very special talent. Meg didn't think it was necessary for her to keep a distance from the customers. It was quite good like this. Really? Yabemia's face was filled with disbelief. She couldn't believe what she had just heard. Yes, of course. As for your salary, the first month will be considered as a probationary period. It will be 4,500 copper coins. The restaurant will include lunch, but breakfast and dinner are not included. At the same time, it won't include accommodation. I know you're in a difficult situation, so I'll give you half a month's salary in advance to let you rent a room and have your meals. Meg nodded. He looked at Yabemia's clothes, which were stained with oil and patched up. After a moment of silence, he nodded and said, the restaurant will also provide 2 sets of work clothes. I'll give them to you later. This. Yabemia's mouth was wide open. She suddenly felt dizzy from happiness. All she did was memorize a few pieces of paper, move the table, and smile, and she was hired by Meg. She was even offered a salary of 4,500 copper coins. When she worked in the previous restaurant, she only received 800 copper coins a month, and it didn't include accommodation or food. System, show me the female clothing list. I want to get a set of work clothes for the new employee. Meg said in his mind. The system is a legitimate system. It doesn't provide female clothing. The system said seriously. I'll buy 2 sets of clothes and 2 pairs of shoes. I'll pay cash. Meg didn't beat around the bush. The system was silent for a moment. Then, it asked tentatively, then, can you add a little more to the removable blinds? Usually, when you buy things, wouldn't it be cheaper if you pack 2 things together? How about 5 gold coins? Meg asked. The individual transaction has been completed. 6 gold coins have been successfully deducted. The shutters are being processed and will be ready in 10 minutes. If you spend more than 10 gold coins, you will receive a full set of installation services. A line of words silently floated across the system. 10 gold coins should be enough. Meg wanted to complain that the system automatically deducted the money. However, on second thought, 10 gold coins for 2 sets of clothes and 2 pairs of shoes wasn't too expensive. It was within the acceptable range. Moreover, if the system could help him with the installation, it would be much easier than doing it himself. After the successful transaction, the system became more enthusiastic. It continued, what type of female clothing do you need? The system can provide normal uniform, office lady attire, dress, spaghetti skirt, hip wrap skirt, sailor uniform, maid uniform, school swimsuit. Chapter 106. The designs provided by the system were indeed very complete. They could basically satisfy all the occasions and uses. Mag roughly went through them, and chose a long black and white maid costume, which was a little similar to a blue and white maid costume. The system directly stole Reem's picture. She wore a white tube top and an apron, a black bra and skirt that revealed her delicate collarbones. There was a white bow tied around her neck, a white hairband on her head, and a black hairband on her head. 5 pairs of black and white stockings were included as a bonus. As for shoes, Mag chose 2 pairs of leather flats, 1 black and 1 white. They were simple in design, but they should be more comfortable. After all, He was so busy working in the restaurant. After 8 hours of work, wearing high heels would probably break his feet. Total 11 gold coins. You can start customizing after payment. Estimated time to complete is 5 minutes, the system said. That's it. Pay. Meg was quite satisfied with his taste. These two made outfits were actually quite conservative. It was a bit of his bad taste. He wouldn't be able to see them outside his restaurant. Payment complete. Data collection complete. Processing in progress. It will be delivered in 5 minutes, the system replied. Sister MIA, you're not dreaming. It really is the Aden Square outside. Amy looked at Yarbemia, who was still in a daze. She was also quite happy to hear Meg's words. Yarbemia came back to her senses. She looked at Meg and shook her head. I think the salary is too high. I can't accept so much. My previous job only paid 800 a month. You only need to pay me 800. I'll work very hard. No, you're worth it. Besides, our restaurant's target audience is middle to high-income people. What we need is for you to show enthusiasm and work standards that are worth this salary. Meg shook his head with a smile. He flipped open the menu on the table. Your lunch is a plate of Yangju fried rice. Of course, you can choose 2 plates of Laji Rugiamo for lunch. When the restaurant releases new dishes, you can also choose any dish that costs less than 600 copper coins. 600 copper coins. Yarbemia's eyes widened as she looked at the price on the menu. A plate of Yangju fried rice costs 600 copper coins. If she guessed correctly, this was the delicious food she had just eaten. If that delicious food had to be measured by money, then 600 copper coins was not expensive at all. It was just that she didn't have the money. Now that Meg said he would provide her with a plate of fried rice for lunch every day, or she could exchange it for other dishes of the same price in the restaurant. This employee benefit was many times higher than her salary. All right, let's not talk about the salary. This is only for the probation period. If you're efficient this month, I'll consider your salary. Meg gestured for Yarbemia to sit down. Yarbemia. The starting salary for a second-class waitress was 4,500 copper coins, and the average salary was about 5,000 copper coins. With Yarbemia's appearance, she could definitely be a first-class waitress. Now, Meg was using a first-class waitress to do the work of a third-class waitress, and paying a second-class waitress the same salary. Yarbemia was not losing out. However, because of her identity as a half-dragon, no restaurant would hire Yarbemia even if she received a third-class waitress salary. Otherwise, she would not have fainted in front of the restaurant. Therefore, Yarbemia was not an exploitative capitalist. As for the fact that the benefits were only for lunch, that was because the cost of ingredients was too high. The cost of ingredients for a plate of Yangju fried rice was almost 300 copper coins, which was even higher than her salary. She might as well ask Meg to do some extra work for her. There was an empty room on the second floor, but Meg did not like other people living in his house. Since she was an employee, he should keep a certain distance from her. Therefore, he paid her in advance and let her rent a room outside. When Yarbemia took the cup of water from Meg, she was still in a daze. After waking up, she, who had always been unlucky, was hit by happiness. She could eat delicious food, be recognized, and now, she even had a job. Moreover, it was the job that she wanted the most, which allowed her to have direct contact with customers. Most importantly, her monthly salary was 4,500 copper coins, and she could eat delicious food for lunch. The happiness came too suddenly, and she was still in a daze. Meg was not in a hurry to guide her. It always took some time to adapt to the changes in her life. When he heard the system's notification that the clothes had arrived, he went upstairs and took the clothes and shoes that the system had packed in 3 bags. He also asked the system to print 2 pictures of maids. After all, there were no such clothes in this world, and it would be embarrassing if she did not know how to wear them. He was not in a good position to teach her. These are your work clothes. You can change into them before you go to work tomorrow. Here are 25 gold coins. Find a safe and comfortable place to live. The rest should be enough for your normal expenses this month. The rest of your salary will be paid on the 1st of next month. Meg put the bags on the table and handed a handful of gold coins to Yarbemia. Thank you, boss. I will work hard. Yarbemia took the gold coins with both hands. Her eyes were moist. It was the first time in many years that she had been recognized and cared for like this. It was not because he pitied her, nor was it because he coveted her body. It was because he recognized her ability and felt that she was qualified for this job. This feeling of trust made her feel that she was not so bad after all. At least there was still work that she could do. Then I will call you MIA. I hope to see your smiling face tomorrow and in the future. You look really good when you smile. Meg nodded with a smile. Go. It will be difficult to find a room when it gets dark. Good luck, Sister MIA. See you tomorrow. Amy also waved her little hand. See you. Yarbemia nodded. She took the 3 bags on the table and looked at Meg and Amy with gratitude. She turned and walked towards the door. She was curious and looked forward to what kind of clothes were in the bags. The clothes she was wearing were left behind by her mother. Father, does this mean that Sister MIA doesn't have to continue selling matches anymore? Amy asked. Yes. She will be a member of our restaurant from now on. Meg nodded with a smile. It seemed that she and Amy could get along well. With the waitress problem solved, Meg also felt a lot more relaxed. The system's prompt to install the shutters rang in his mind. He confirmed the installation and took Amy upstairs to take a shower. When they came downstairs, the shutters were already installed. It was almost time for dinner. He lowered the shutters and turned on the crystal chandelier to block all the prying eyes. The system's products were really amazing. During dinner, there were several knocks on the door. Meg ignored them. After a while, there was silence. The persuasion effect was quite good. Chapter 107. Meg looked at Yarbemia, who was pouting with her left leg raised. She was acting cute while facing the window. Meg was stunned for a moment before he couldn't help but laugh. She was actually quite cute. Yarbemia had changed into a black and white maid outfit. The custom-made maid outfit fit her perfectly. Her limbs were slender, and her breasts were large. The waistcoat perfectly accentuated her figure. She wore a white headband on her head, and her long blonde hair was tied into a side ponytail, hanging on her right side. She wore black knee-length socks and black leather shoes. Her current appearance, coupled with the smile on her face, made her look like a young girl full of vitality. Yarbemia was stunned for a moment. She quickly retracted her arms and legs and stood at attention. Her face was red, and she looked up at the sky. What should I do? Why did I suddenly become transparent? And the boss saw me. This is so embarrassing. MIA, why are you here so early? Come in. Meg opened the door with a smile. He didn't expect Yarbemia to come so early. He didn't tell her what time to come yesterday. Good morning, Mr. Mack. When I left yesterday, I saw the sign on the door saying that the restaurant opens at 7:30 a.m., so I thought you would wake up early to prepare. That's why I came early to help. Yarbemia walked over. Although her face was still a little red, her expression and attitude were quite serious when she spoke to Meg. After she finished speaking, she added, I ate early on the way here. Okay. You don't have to come so early next time. You don't need to help in the kitchen. Just come before the restaurant opens. Meg shook his head with a smile. He moved aside to let Yarbemia in. This girl was quite attentive. He was quite satisfied with her attitude towards work. I've been helping in the kitchen for many years. If you need me to prepare ingredients, I can do a lot of things. Washing vegetables, cutting vegetables, cleaning the kitchen. I can do all of that, Yarbemia said enthusiastically. Compared to receiving customers, she was more familiar with these things. Your job scope doesn't include this, and you might not be able to handle my cooking. When I need your help in the future, I'll naturally let you know. Meg smiled and shook his head. The food supply system had already taken care of everything, and there were no ingredients that he couldn't handle. As for cutting the vegetables, it wasn't something that Yarbemia could handle. However, this girl was quite enthusiastic about her work. Meg poured a glass of water for Yarbemia and said with a smile, "Take a seat and rest for a while. Amy isn't awake yet, so I'll go prepare the ingredients. It's your first day at work, so you should get used to the pace of work. Don't get frustrated even if you make a few mistakes. Just do your best. It'll be very busy when we open for business, so enjoy some leisure time." Oh. Yarbemia held the warm blanket in her hands, and her heart was also filled with warmth. Her previous boss had ordered her around like a donkey, and she barely had any time to rest. However, Mr. Mack didn't allow her to do anything other than what she had agreed to do. She could tell from his attitude and tone that he treated her as an equal. She hesitated for a moment before sitting down obediently. As she looked around the beautiful restaurant, she thought to herself, 600 copper coins for a set of delicacies. Everything from the preparation of ingredients to the cooking must be very meticulous. I'd better not go and cause trouble for Mr. Mack. Meg skillfully kneaded the dough and cooked the meat. He turned around to look at Yarbemia, who was sitting obediently in the restaurant, and nodded with satisfaction. She's pretty, obedient, doesn't talk much, works hard, and has a good attitude. It's not easy to find an employee like her. I've found a treasure this time. At around 7 a.m., Amy changed her clothes and washed up before coming downstairs with Ugly Duckling in her arms. She stood at the entrance of the kitchen and looked at Meg as she rubbed her eyes, and said, "Good morning, Father." "Good morning, Amy." Meg smiled. Looking at the flower on his hands, he walked over and kissed her hair on her forehead. He pointed outside, and said, "Mia is here too. Go and play with her for a while. I'll make breakfast." "Okay." Amy nodded. Then she said, "But Father, I'll wait for Half-Beard Grandpa to come to eat my Yeongju fried rice this morning. He said he'll treat me to something delicious. I just want to have a rugiamo first." "Okay." Meg nodded with a smile. When Crassus didn't come to the restaurant the day before yesterday, the little one had nagged him several times. She wanted him to fulfill his promise. "Good morning, big sister Mia." Amy turned around with Ugly Duckling in her arms. When she saw Yarbemia, her eyes lit up. "Wow, big sister Mia is so beautiful today. Your new clothes are so beautiful." A smile appeared on Yarbemia's face upon hearing Amy's praise. However, she was also a little shy. She looked at Amy, and said, "Amy is also very beautiful. She's prettier than me." Amy thought for a moment before nodding seriously. "Yes, I think so too." She climbed onto a chair and sat down across from Yarbemia. Meow Tilda Ugly Duckling looked at Yarbemia with a cautious and curious expression. It was a little unhappy that this little guy had touched its head the day before, but it was quite pleasing to the eye today. "Is this a kitten?" Yarbemia asked curiously. This was the first time that she had seen a kitten of this color. Amy shook her head. "No, it's actually a duckling. It's so ugly, so I call it Ugly Duckling. It'll become a swan when it grows up." "A duckling that'll become a swan?" Yarbemia looked at the kitten in Amy's arms, and she was momentarily stunned. "Yes, I'm waiting for it to grow up." Amy nodded. She thought back to what Mia had said when she was unconscious the day before. "I think you'll like it too. It's very cute." Yarbemia looked at Ugly Duckling with a hesitant expression. "Can I hold it?" "Of course, but we have to ask Ugly Duckling if it agrees." Amy nodded and looked down at Ugly Duckling. Ugly Duckling covered its eyes with one paw, and raised its other paw in front of itself in an ugly gesture of rejection. "Looks like it doesn't want you to hold it yet." Amy shrugged with resignation. "It's an interesting little guy." Yarbemia withdrew her hand without feeling dejected. The aroma of braised meat drifted out of the kitchen, and she couldn't help but take a deep breath of the rich aroma. It was different from the Yeongju fried rice. It should be the Laji Rugiamo that cost 300 copper coins on the menu. She was curious and expectant. "Let's eat." Meg came out of the kitchen with a plate of Yeongju fried rice and 2 rugiamos. He handed one of the rugiamos to Amy, sat down beside her, and began to eat. First thing in the morning was a plate of Yeongju fried rice. The rice from the spring of life could restore one's body to its best state. Then a rugiamo would make one's blood boil, and the tiredness of the morning would disappear completely. Yarbemia looked at the Ruggiamo in Amy's hand, and swallowed involuntarily when she smelled the rich aroma of the meat. Sister Mia, do you want to know what a Ruggiamo tastes like? Amy looked at the Ruggiamo in her hand, and then at Yarbemia. Yarbemia nodded without thinking. Her body was honest. But was Amy going to let her try it? Should she eat it? She suddenly felt a little conflicted. Chapter 108. Yarbemia was taken aback. She looked at Amy, who was eating the Ruggiamo happily, with a strange expression on her face. She didn't expect this turn of events, which was completely different from what she had imagined. However, the way Amy ate was so adorable, and she was enjoying it so much. She was holding the Ruggiamo with both hands like a little squirrel, chewing happily. There was a little sauce at the corner of her mouth, and her little face was full of happiness and joy. Yarbemia, who was sitting opposite her, couldn't help swallowing her saliva. Although she hadn't tasted the Ruggiamo before, the rich aroma and the way Amy ate told her that it must be as delicious as the Yangju fried rice. Meg looked at Yarbemia, who was swallowing her saliva as carefully as she could. It was indeed torturous to smell such delicious food and watch others eat it. He looked at the Ruggiamo in his hand, hesitated for a moment, and then said with a smile, "You came here so early in the morning. Why don't you have a Ruggiamo first? You can deduct it from the lunch portion." No, it's not necessary. Didn't Mr. Mack say he would provide lunch? Yarbemia shook her head firmly. Then she looked at the Ruggiamo in his hand expectantly. "But can I have 2 of these for lunch?" "Sure." Meg nodded and didn't force her. He didn't expect this girl to be able to resist the temptation of delicious food and follow the rules. Meow. Ugly Duckling, who was lying in Amy's arms, let out a long meow at Meg. It bared its little teeth and stared at the Yangju fried rice in front of Meg with longing in its eyes. It seemed that goat's milk couldn't satisfy it anymore. "Father, can Ugly Duckling eat something else now?" Amy looked at Meg. Ugly Duckling also looked at Meg expectantly. "It's been less than a week. It can drink milk for 2 more days." Meg thought for a while, but still shook his head. Kitten's digestive ability was too weak. Although Ugly Duckling couldn't be treated as a normal kitten, the Yangju fried rice had all kinds of hard-to-chew side dishes, which were still not suitable for it. Meow tilde Ugly Duckling withdrew its gaze with a dejected expression. It looked up at the ceiling with tears welling up in its eyes. After breakfast, there were already customers lining up outside the door. "I didn't eat anything yesterday. I'm starving. I need 4 Ruggiamos this morning to replenish my energy," Harrison said with a smile. "You look like you haven't eaten anything for the entire night," Gyurge said with a smirk. "How did you figure that out? But today is the school day off. Why didn't Palmer come with you? Don't you usually like to stick to you?" Harrison laughed dryly, and then asked curiously. Gyurge shook his head. "I heard from him that there was a student who was much better at math than him. He was so sad when he went home last night. This morning, he woke up and started to memorize the multiplication table. He asked me to bring it home for him. He won't go out until he finished memorizing it. There's someone better than our little math Prince Palmer. And a student who was just a student. Rare, this is really a rare thing." Harrison's eyes widened, and then he couldn't help but laugh. "Looks like the little guy has suffered a big blow. Should I secretly bring him a Ruggiamo later?" "Forget it. If Miranda sees it, she'll definitely eat it. I'll bring him here tomorrow when he's in a better mood." Gyurge shook his head with a smile. "Besides, it's not a bad thing. He always thought he was the best in class, and he played with Paba every day. Now that he's feeling a little threatened, he's starting to study." Harrison waved his hand. "It doesn't matter if he's a little naughty. It won't do if he's like a girl. Tell him I'm free tomorrow, and I'll take them to the racecourse to play. After that, I'll bring them to eat something delicious." Gyurge nodded. "Okay. Then I won't go to the workshop tomorrow. I'll bring them here to make friends with the little boss. I think they'll like her." Someone looked in through the window and saw a third person at the table. He couldn't help but be surprised. "Huh? Why is there a young girl here?" Could it be the boss's wife who hasn't shown up yet? There really is. Could it be that Mr. Mac closed the restaurant for the whole day yesterday to find the boss's wife? That's hard to say. Maybe she's Mr. Mac's new waitress. The restaurant is so busy, and Mr. Mac can't handle it alone. Someone else guessed. Suddenly, the topic of the girl who was sitting at the same table as Meg and Amy became the topic of conversation while waiting for the restaurant to open. In the past few days, apart from the first-time customers, the other customers had consciously stopped knocking on the door. After all, no matter how hard they knocked, Mr. Mac wouldn't open the door. However, no one dared to remove the door, either. If they were blacklisted and banned from the restaurant, it wouldn't make up for the loss. Besides, Sajaras had to pay 10 gold coins for burning a chair. This exquisite wooden door would cost at least a few dozen gold coins. The customers are already here. Should I open the door and let them in? Yarbemir hurriedly said when he saw the long line outside the door. He was about to get up. No, the restaurant opens at 7:30. We'll open it when it's time. Meg shook his head. He flipped the menu on the table and pushed it in front of Yarbemir. These are the restaurant's rules. You can take a look at them. If the customers break the rules, you can remind them directly. If they don't change after you remind them, just let me know. Aren't you going to open the door? Yarbemir was stunned. The restaurant hadn't even opened yet, and there was already a long line. In the Aden Square, only the Friar Tavern and a few other popular restaurants would have such a long line during dinner time. No other restaurant would have such a long line so early in the morning. Moreover, Mag actually left those customers outside the restaurant to dry. He didn't even open the restaurant until opening time. She hesitated for a moment, but still held herself back from asking any questions. Her gaze landed on the back of the menu. There were 4 rules written in gold on it. No loud noises in the restaurant. Yarbemir became more and more surprised as she read the rules. In her mind, customers with money were the first priority. Even if they had some unreasonable requests, the restaurant would try its best to satisfy them. However, in Mag's case, he saw equality between the restaurant and the customers. Customers could choose to eat in the restaurant, and the restaurant could choose not to let customers eat in the restaurant. It was the first time she had heard of such a capricious two-way choice. She couldn't believe it was written on the menu. Put the bowls away. I'm going to open the door. The first day of work has begun. Meg swallowed the last mouthful of Ruggiamo and smiled at Yarbemir. He stood up and walked to the door. Ding. He opened the door. Everyone smiled and greeted Meg. They complained about not being able to eat the delicious food yesterday, but overall, they were quite harmonious. Good morning, Mr. Mac. Crassus, who hadn't seen Meg for 2 days, came in with the crowd. He greeted Meg. His half-burnt beard was trimmed. Although it was a little short, it looked much neater. Good morning. Meg nodded and narrowed his eyes. This old guy is here again. It seems he's not going to give up. Half-beard Grandpa, you said you would treat me to food. I have something I want to eat today. Amy's eyes lit up when she saw Crassus. Chapter 109. Although Meg was a little disgusted with Crassus getting close to Amy, he did not have a valid reason to refuse him entry to the restaurant for the time being. After all, other than wanting to take Amy as his disciple, Crassus did not violate the restaurant's dining rules in any other way. In a situation where both parties were not equal in strength, he could not force him to leave, so he could only guard against him and prevent him from abducting Amy. Hearing Amy's words, the customers in the restaurant that night smiled knowingly. They still remembered the conversation between Amy and Crassus that day. Sure, just order whatever you want to eat. It's my treat, Crassus replied with a smile and walked over to the table where Amy was sitting. Then I'll have a plate of Yangju fried rice. A happy smile appeared on Amy's face. She looked at Crassus and said seriously, although I'm the one eating, you still have to pay me later. You said it yourself. I'll give it to you now. 6 gold coins. Crassus took out a money pouch from his chest and took out 6 gold coins and gently placed them in front of Amy. His expression was somewhat awkward, but he still seemed to be in a good mood. Thank you, half-beard Grandpa. Amy accepted the gold coins happily. She raised her head and winked at Meg, her small face full of a scheming smile. Meg could not help but shake his head with a smile. This was what Crassus had promised Amy. His original purpose was to create an opportunity for him to be alone with Amy, but now it seemed that he had confirmed that Amy was quite talented. This was also good news for Meg. Even a magician like Crassus wanted to take Amy as his disciple. This showed that Amy was indeed very talented in magic. She might even grow into a powerful magician in the future. Just as Crassus said, only with great power could one survive in this world. Of course, Meg now had another idea. If he had enough capital, he could also exchange it for the confidence to survive in this world from the system. After all, it was not very reliable for Meg to slowly cultivate his own strength. Earning money from the system was a better way to go. Besides, the restaurant's upgrades and modifications were also a part of increasing his confidence. After Yarbemia brought the plates into the kitchen, she quickly walked out and stood beside Meg. She mimicked him with a smile on her face and legs together. Her posture was a little stiff, and her heart was pounding. She was so nervous that she felt that her mind was a little blank. "Hey, Mr. Mac, who is this?" Harrison asked curiously as he looked at Yarbemia. Although he could tell at a glance that she was a half-dragon, his eyes still lit up when he saw her in such a unique dress. He could vaguely see her delicate collarbone, her delicate calves in black stockings, and the white hairband on her head. It was a style that he had never seen before. Many customers were also looking at Meg and Yarbemia curiously. They were discussing this question at the entrance of the restaurant, so naturally, they wanted to get an answer from Meg. Amy was a half-elf, so her mother must be an elf. Yarbemia was obviously not Amy's mother. However, although she was a half-dragon girl, when she smiled, it was very comfortable. It was like a spring breeze, refreshing and pleasant, and it made people's moods subconsciously improve. "She is MIA, the restaurant's new employee." Meg introduced her to the customers with a smile. Most of the customers who came to line up early in the morning were the restaurant's regulars. If they could accept Amy, then they would be more tolerant. It was clearly a good choice to let Yarbemia start her new job here. "See, I told you she's a new employee." Harrison snapped his fingers and said proudly to Gyurge, who was behind him. He then gave Meg a thumbs up. "Mr. Mac, you really have a good eye for employees. She's a perfect match for the restaurant's style." Meg nodded with a smile. He liked hearing Harrison's words. He had always had a good eye for people. Yarbemia blushed slightly, not out of shyness, but rather out of excitement. This was the first time she had heard praise from a customer. Although it was praise for Meg, it made her feel flattered that she was a perfect match for the restaurant. "Yeah, this girl is so beautiful when she smiles. It makes people feel better." Gyurge also nodded with a smile, and sat down with Harrison. All of the other customers also cast approving glances at her with smiles on their faces. Perhaps it was due to Amy's influence, but all of their prejudice toward half-breeds had already disappeared. Not only did they find Amy adorable, but they also found Yarbemia to be quite pleasant to look at. The smile on Yarbemia's face grew a little more confident. She straightened her back and felt less nervous, but she also felt that she had an extra responsibility on her shoulders. From now on, her words and actions would have an impact on the customer's impression of the restaurant. She couldn't let down Mr. Mac's trust in her. After the customers in the line had all entered, Meg gently let go of the doorknob and looked at Yarbemia. "Relax, don't be too nervous. I'll take care of the first 10 customers' orders, and you'll take care of the ones after that. Can you do that?" "Millimeter HM." Yarbemia nodded solemnly. Her right hand was clenched into a fist, and she was clearly still a little nervous. "Good luck, big sister MIA." Amy walked over with Ugly Duckling in her arms. She raised her little fist and looked up at Yarbemia with encouragement. She shook Ugly Duckling, indicating that it should do something as well. Meow tilde Ugly Duckling gave a perfunctory meow. Yarbemia nodded. She looked at Meg, Amy, and Ugly Duckling, and felt a warm feeling in her heart. Meg didn't say anything else. He walked into the restaurant and began to take care of the customers' orders. "Mr. Mac, I want 3 plates of Yeongju fried rice. 2 for now, and 1 for later, Crassus said to Meg with a smile. All right, please wait a moment. Meg nodded. One of the plates was naturally Amy's. He memorized the orders of the first 10 customers who entered the restaurant, and then quickly walked into the kitchen and began to cook. Yarbemia was a little nervous, and even a little stuttered when she spoke, but she still tried to keep a smile on her face as she began to take orders for the remaining customers. Ding! The bell at the door rang. Welcome. Yarbemia looked at Sargeras, who pushed open the door with an iron chair in his hand. His big bald head and the lava patterns on his skin were a little scary. She swallowed the last word unconsciously. Chapter 110. Yarbemia, who was a little nervous, was amused by Sargeras's words. Her nervousness disappeared in an instant. She suddenly felt that the customer who entered the restaurant, even if he was a demon, didn't seem so scary. A smile appeared on her face again, and she nodded. Welcome. Sargeras was taken aback by the smile on Yarbemia's face. Her smile was so pure, like the clearest dew on a mountain peak in the morning. Even his heart, which was wrapped in layers of lava, couldn't help but tremble. It turned out that there was such a beautiful smile in this world. Just looking at it made his depressed mood lighten up. He smiled, put down his iron chair, and sat down at the table near the door. It seemed that this girl was a new waitress. He tried to lower his voice and said with a smile, I'd like 5 large Ruggiamos. Okay, please wait a moment. Yarbemia nodded with a smile and walked quickly to the kitchen. All the customers had finished ordering, and the waitresses were serving the dishes according to Meg's instructions. Morning, big bald guy. Although Sargeras looked fierce, she thought he was quite honest. Sargeras looked at her with great familiarity. Morning. Sargeras nodded quickly. Amy gave him the feeling that he couldn't afford to offend her. Besides, she was really cute. He couldn't stop laughing when she was digging a hole for Crassus. Today, seeing her sitting in front of Crassus made him want to laugh again. With Yarbemia's help, Meg only needed to focus on cooking in the kitchen. Ruggiamos were delivered to the customers one by one, and plates of Yangju fried rice were carried out of the kitchen. The efficiency of the cooking increased by at least 1/3. System, can I get a bigger oven? Mag asked as he looked at the bhaji bread in the oven. It would take about 10 minutes for the oven to finish cooking. The host is not authorized to upgrade the kitchenware, the system said. Then I won't upgrade it. Give me the same one, Meg said without thinking. Adding kitchenware is part of the restaurant's renovation. The host is not authorized to purchase it, the system said again. System, have you heard the story of Jubapi? The one where the rooster crows in the middle of the night. Meg raised his eyebrows. Please use the metaphor carefully. It's obviously not suitable for the current situation. The system didn't crow in the middle of the night. However, the system still suggests that the restaurant's business hours be extended to increase the turnover, the system said seriously. TSK. You still say that you are not Jubapi. Imitating a rooster is just a means to prolong the working time of the workers. Mag was a little disdainful. Then, he calmly said, System, I can't extend the opening hours by even a minute. I'm living a very comfortable life now. I don't have to worry about food and clothing. It's so hard to earn money, so spending 50,000 gold coins on a bunch of random things really doesn't interest me at all. The system fell into silence. After a while, it said tentatively, there are many benefits to upgrading the restaurant to level 1. You can unlock the right to purchase medium-size kitchenware and existing kitchenware. You can add a basic protection system to the restaurant and improve the restaurant's safety. At the same time, you'll get a free exterior and interior renovation. These are just some of the benefits. There's a big surprise package waiting for you. Amy is super talented. I'll just be a salted fish dad. I'm not interested in the protection system. Meg was not interested. The system was silent for a long time. After Meg finished cooking 2 servings of Yangju fried rice, it seemed to have made up its mind and said, small Ruggiamo oven, 15 gold coins each. Limit, 1, less. Meg raised the corner of his mouth, but still asked with a frown. The system's oven is very stable. The Baiji bread it makes. The system said righteously. I don't want to hear it. Meg shook his head. He didn't want to listen to the system's promotion anymore. He said flatly, then I'll buy one. I'll receive it tonight. Although he looked calm, he was a little proud. It was a good choice to ignore the system strategically. Only in this way could he turn the seller's market into a buyer's market. Being a salted fish dad was not bad, but it was every father's dream to protect his daughter at a critical moment. This was his little blueprint. 15 gold coins have been deducted. The oven is being customized. Note, delivery tonight. A line of words floated in his mind, and the system went silent. Meg continued cooking in a good mood. Since Yarbemia had come to work, Meg had prepared 16 extra Baiji bread in the morning. They were all sold out before the opening hours were over. The increase in efficiency was obvious. When the opening hours were over, Meg walked out of the kitchen and stopped Yarbemia, who was about to take the order with a smile. He looked at the customer with a smile and said, "Sir, the opening hours are over, and the Ruggiamo is sold out. If you want to eat more, please come back next time." I see. The customer was a little disappointed, but he had heard about the restaurant's rules. He had to turn around and leave. "Mr. Mack, I see." Yarbemia looked at the customer's back and stopped on second thought. It was not good to turn down a customer like this. Our restaurant strictly follows the opening hours. It's been set since the opening day. Meg walked to the door and turned over the open hours sign. He explained with a smile. Yarbemia nodded thoughtfully and smiled again. "That's right. Mr. Mack's restaurant is different from other restaurants." Mag looked at Yarbemia with an encouraging expression, and said, "Although you've made 2 mistakes, it's already very good that you can do this on your first day. Keep working hard." "Yes, I will." Yarbemia nodded seriously. Her face was a little red, and her eyes were bright and happy. She was recognized by the customer and praised by the boss. For the first time in her life, she realized that she could do something well. She was not a useless person. Meg nodded with a smile. Yarbemia looked delicate, but she was full of energy when she was working. She had done 4 tasks: reception, ordering, serving, and cleaning. Although she had made 2 mistakes, they were not serious. Besides, she had resolved the awkwardness with a sincere smile. It was completely beyond Meg's expectation that she could do so well on her first day of work. She was really talented in this area. "That's right. Big Sister MAA is awesome. We sold more this morning than before." Amy sat at the counter and counted the gold coins with stars in her eyes. Her love for gold coins was second only to delicious food. "Then you can clean up the restaurant first. Also, come in. I'll teach you how to use this dishwasher." Meg led Yarbemia into the kitchen, opened the dishwasher, and taught her how to use it. It was an idiotic one-button operation. Although Yarbemia was amazed by the iron box that could clean the bowls in just a short while, she quickly learned how to do it. After all, everything in the restaurant was a novelty to her. She had never seen anything other than pots and pans before. "Let's go, Amy. I'll take you out for a walk. We can buy some goat milk for Ugly Duckling." Meg walked out of the kitchen and took Amy out. The second benefit of having an employee was that he could free up some free time. Next up is a PY deal. I'd like to recommend my good friend Shi Chuanbai's Becoming a Stay-at-Home Dad. It's a very popular stay-at-home dad novel recently. I'm sure many people have read it, right? Well, I'm in CD. Maybe I'll have a meal with him in a couple of days. If you want to send me razor blades, I'll give it to him in person. Introduction. 500 years ago, Chen Shi was swallowed by a spatial rift and entered the cultivation world. 500 years later, he returned to Earth after many hardships, only to find that only 5 years had passed on Earth. Outside the old courtyard, with a beautiful woman by his side and flickering candlelight. A cool breeze, half a moon, and peach blossoms still smiling in the spring breeze. "Wait, whose child is this? Why is she calling me Papa?" Chen Shi was a little dumbfounded as he looked at the little girl in front of him. Becoming a stay-at-home dad after returning from cultivation. In this life, he didn't want to fight for the throne, nor did he want to be a tyrant. He only wanted to live a peaceful life and be a stay-at-home dad who dotes on his wife. Chapter 111. For lunch, Meg made Yarbemia 2 rugiamos according to her request. He and Amy each had a plate of Yeongju fried rice and a rugiamo. Sister Mia, have a taste. The rugiamo is really good, Amy said as she ate her fried rice and looked at Yarbemia, who was holding a rugiamo in both hands. Okay. Yarbemia nodded and looked at the rugiamo in her hands with shining eyes. She had served so many customers in the morning and watched them enjoy the food with happy faces. She had swallowed a lot of saliva secretly. After a busy morning, she finally got her own rugiamo. She took a bite with a solemn and expectant face. This taste. Yarbemia couldn't help but exclaim. The rugiamo had 2 layers of soft and sweet biji bread with tender braised meat. The delicious gravy overflowed and filled her mouth with tender braised meat. Every taste bud on the tip of her tongue was cheering and jumping with joy. Compared to the mild Yeongju fried rice, this rugiamo was so much more stimulating that she couldn't help but close her eyes. After swallowing, the taste of the braised meat still lingered in her mouth. After swallowing it, the wonderful taste seemed to suddenly become a little violent, turning into a warm current that ran through her body, causing the blood all over her body to become restless. Her face immediately turned red, as if something wanted to drill out of her body, causing her to press on the table and stand up, opening her mouth to let out a long dragon's roar. One of the 2 buttons in front of the maid's dress burst open, revealing her fair skin. A dragon tail covered in golden scales suddenly sprang out from under the dress behind her, knocking the chair behind her to the ground. Meg and Amy raised their heads at the same time. Their throats moved, and they swallowed the rice in their mouths. Their expressions of shock were synchronized. Her dress also burst open. And is this atavism? Mag raised an eyebrow as he swept his gaze over Yarbemia's cleavage. He didn't think that there would be a maid who would have her clothes ripped off. However, his gaze quickly fell on Yarbemia's dragon tail that was peeking out from under her dress. The thumb-sized golden scales were densely packed together, and they shone like pure gold. They swept from side to side uneasily. If she completely transformed into a giant dragon, perhaps it would be a giant golden dragon. Wow, it's a dragon tail, Amy exclaimed as she looked at Yarbemia. Ugly Duckling also stuck its head out to take a look. Surprisingly, it wasn't afraid. Instead, it bared its teeth and extended its little paws as if it had seen an opponent. It should be fine. Meg's brows furrowed. If her atavism was toward becoming a giant dragon, then it should be a good thing for Yarbemia. After all, giant dragons stood at the pinnacle of the Norland continent, and they were born with immense power. Yarbemia stopped her dragon roar, and slowly opened her eyes. The golden light in her golden eye slowly receded, and her cheeks were flushed. Her forehead was covered with fine beads of sweat, and her gaze was a little dazed. She felt as if a huge beast that had been trapped in her body all this time had been completely released in that instant. That feeling of satisfaction made her legs go weak. However, at the same time, wisps of warmth slowly converged on her body, as if a burst of strange energy were being injected into her flesh and blood. This was a sense of fullness that she had never experienced before, and it was so comfortable that she couldn't help but let loose a moan of pleasure. Her gaze then met the astonished gazes of Amy and Meg, who were holding spoons in their hands. She looked down at the gaping wound on her chest, and Yarbemia's flushed cheeks became even redder. She immediately straightened her body, and tried to cover her chest with her hands. She didn't expect that in her nervousness, the dragon's tail would knock the chair next to her to the ground. She turned around and her gaze fell on the dragon's tail that was exposed from her skirt. She exclaimed, "What? What is this?" Her little face paled and she was so anxious that she was about to cry. Meg stood up and gently placed a hand on Yarbemia's shoulder as he looked into her eyes, and said in a gentle voice, "Don't be nervous, Mia. You're a half-dragon, and after eating this rugiamo, you might be experiencing atavism or evolution. This should be a good thing for you." She was only a 17-year-old girl, and her previous experiences had left her with a sense of insecurity. Furthermore, no one would be able to calm down after seeing a dragon tail suddenly appear on their body. Yarbemia looked into Meg's gentle eyes, and her emotions gradually calmed down. She grabbed onto her collar with one hand, and said with reddened eyes, But I don't want a tail. I don't want them to look at me strangely. It's already strange enough that I have a pair of dragon horns. If I have a dragon tail as well, why would they be strange? It's actually very cute. Meg shook his head with a smile as he looked at her with an encouraging gaze. That's right, that's right. What an adorable dragon tail. If big sister Mia becomes a giant dragon, then she'll be able to fly into the sky with little Amy and Ugly Duckling. Amy nodded with a serious expression. But I just want to be a normal person and be able to continue working at the restaurant. But now. Yarbemia wore a conflicted expression. She could feel the warmth of the hand on her shoulder, and she was also comforted by Meg and Amy's encouraging gazes. However, at the sight of the golden dragon tail behind her, her face was filled with helplessness and concern. Meg looked at Yarbemia with a hint of pity in his eyes. If a normal person were to learn that they could become a powerful giant dragon, their first reaction would definitely be to become excited. That kind of power that others could only look up to, as well as the opportunity to pay back all the grievances that she had suffered in the past. However, her first reaction was to worry that she would lose her job at the restaurant because of this new tail. It seemed that she didn't hold a grudge against her despicable boss, nor did she want to take revenge on those who had bullied her. She just wanted to live a peaceful life. Don't worry. Even with this new tail, you'll still be the only employee of the restaurant, Meg said with a serious expression as he shook his head. Mr. Mac. Yarbemia looked up at Meg with tears in her eyes. Also, maybe you can focus and try to put your tail away, Meg said with a smile as he removed his hand from her shoulder. Yarbemia wasn't the only one who had mutated after eating the Rugiamo. Amy and Sargeras had both benefited from the Rugiamo, and the system had also promised that there wouldn't be any adverse effects, so perhaps this mutation could be controlled. Put it away. Yarbemia's eyes lit up. She slowly closed her eyes and clenched her fists tightly. After a while, a golden light suddenly flashed over her body, and the dragon tail that had poked out from under her dress suddenly disappeared. Huh! The dragon tail is gone, Amy said in surprise as she looked down. It really works. Yarbemia also opened her eyes immediately, and spun around in a circle in surprise. Her dress fluttered slightly, and the extra dragon tail was gone. She looked at Meg with excitement, and said, Mr. Mac, I can really make it disappear. That's good. Apart from that, are there any other changes in your body? Meg asked curiously. He heaved a sigh of relief. Yarbemia clenched her fists to feel the changes in her body, and exclaimed in surprise, I feel like there's an endless supply of energy in my body. I won't feel tired even if I work for an entire day. Chapter 112. Yarbemia looked at the Rugiamo on the table with a conflicted expression. The taste of the Rugiamo was like a kitten scratching her heart. It was completely different from the Yangju fried rice. It would be a pity if she could only have one bite. Sister Mia, your bunny is out. Amy pointed at Yarbemia's chest. Yarbemia was taken aback. She lowered her head to take a look, and blushed immediately. She quickly turned around and buttoned up her shirt again. She turned around with a blushing face and lowered her head, not daring to look at Meg. Meg was calm. He had seen all kinds of things, so he didn't care about this. Yarbemia was still a little girl and a restaurant employee. Big sister Mia, can't you put your tail away now? You can put it away after you finish the Rugiamo. We all think your tail is cute, Amy suggested as she ate a mouthful of fried rice. If you still want to eat, I think it's a good idea. Meg nodded. There were only 3 of them in the restaurant. Yarbemia looked at Meg and Amy's sincere eyes. She hesitated for a moment, then nodded. She picked up the 2 chairs on the floor and picked up the Rugiamo on the table. She took a deep breath and took another big bite. The delicious taste spread in her mouth and turned into a hot current that wreaked havoc. Yarbemia's tail, which she had just put away, darted out again. She didn't roar this time. Her chest rose and fell slightly, but she didn't tear her clothes apart. The golden dragon tail wagged happily behind her, and she finished the 2 Rugiamos in no time. She looked at the empty bag in her hand, and licked her red lips with her pink tongue. She still felt like she hadn't had enough yet. "Big sister Mia, isn't it super delicious?" Amy asked with a hint of pride. Yes, Mr. Max Ruggiamo was delicious. Before entering the restaurant, she had never tasted such delicious food. She couldn't even believe that such delicious food existed in this world. "Also, I feel like the power in my body has increased a little after eating it. It seems to have a special effect on me. Then you can eat more in the future." A smile appeared on Mag's face as he took a bite of the Ruggiamo in his hand. Amy's praises had changed from Amy's daily praises to Mag's and Amy's daily praises. It felt pretty good. After lunch, they rested for a while. When it was time for business, Meg opened the restaurant on time. Yarbemia couldn't control her transformation yet, but she could retract her tail after about a minute. It didn't affect her daily life, so she wasn't that worried. After the transformation, her strength had increased again. Even Meg was a little envious of her. There seemed to be limitless strength in her little body. She didn't feel tired at all even after going back and forth between the kitchen and the restaurant hundreds of times a day. "Goodbye, Mr. Mac, Amy." After cleaning up the restaurant, Yarbemia smiled at Meg and Amy, who were preparing to do the dishes. She had smiled more today than she had in a whole year. She didn't know that work could be so cheerful. "Goodbye, Sister Mia." Amy waved her little hand and hugged Ugly Duckling sleepily. "Be careful on the road," Mag said with a smile. "Okay." Yarbemia nodded seriously and turned to leave. Meg put the last few bowls in the dishwasher. It was a lot easier with someone helping him. Although he had been cooking for a whole day, he didn't feel tired at all. It was indeed more tiring than cooking in the kitchen. "Congratulations, host. You have completed the mission of selling 1,000 Ruggiamos in 10 days. The tofu pudding recipe has been unlocked. Please enter the test field for the God of Cookery within 24 hours. The system's voice sounded at that moment. "Finally, I've completed the mission." It wasn't easy. Meg looked at the glittering experience bag in his mind. It seemed that he would have to stay in the test field for the God of Cookery for a few months tonight. Sweet and savory tofu pudding were two completely different dishes. He carried the sleepy Amy and Ugly Duckling upstairs, washed up, and watched the two little ones fall asleep. Only then did Mag lie back down on the bed. He turned his head to look at the time. It was already 10 p.m. He slowly closed his eyes and entered the test field for the God of Cookery again. Apart from the savory tofu pudding and sweet tofu pudding, there was also a spicy tofu pudding option in the experience bag. However, it was grey and couldn't be clicked on, which meant that he couldn't learn it for the time being. Savory and sweet. Since I'm the boss now, I have to get all the customers and make more money. Meg smiled. He had made up his mind. As for whether or not it would cause a conflict between savory and sweet, that wasn't something he needed to consider. He wasn't like the fat boss, who was a staunch supporter of the sweet side. He wouldn't sell his restaurant to open a bar just because it sold savory tofu pudding. There was an additional refiner on the stove. It was cylindrical and was about the size of a rice cooker. Next to it was a wooden barrel and a brown earthen jar. On the ground, there were 2 large sacks of soybeans, gypsum, various condiments, and various side dishes that could be added according to one's taste. Everything that one needed was here. This should be the simplest dish. I should be able to get out of here as soon as possible. Meg thought to himself. He thought back to his evaluation of those tofu pudding shops years ago. His expression became a little strange. It seemed that things weren't as simple as he thought. The soaking time of the soybeans was directly skipped. The soybeans were crushed in the refiner and turned into fine soy milk. Then, the soy milk was poured into a wooden bucket covered with gauze and filtered. After that, the filtered soy milk was poured into an iron pot at the side and boiled over a large fire. He dissolved the plaster and poured it into the earthen jar. Then, he poured the boiled soy milk into the earthen jar. As time passed, a miraculous scene appeared. The originally thick soy milk started to solidify slowly and turned into a tender white tofu pudding. Making tofu pudding is really easy. Meg raised his eyebrows. He didn't expect to succeed on his first try. The color of the tofu pudding is slightly yellow, and the texture is slightly hard. Unqualified. The voice of the system sounded. It does seem to be a little yellow. Meg leaned forward and looked carefully for a while. It was indeed a little yellow. It seemed that although it was a little silly, it wasn't as easy as he thought. The time on the wall passed day by day. Meg went through hundreds and thousands of attempts and was rejected by the system again and again. System, it should be okay this time, right? Meg put down the 2 bowls of tofu pudding gently. Chapter 113. It had taken Meg more than 50 days to make 2 servings of tofu pudding, 1 savory and 1 bland. If he could go back in time, he would definitely slap himself in the face. Don't compare yourself to others if you have nothing better to do. Back then, when he made those requests, he was simply forcing himself to a dead end. Even if he had the perfect experience of making tofu in his head, after thousands of continuous practice, even he himself wasn't very confident that he could pass the system's test. However, these 2 servings of tofu pudding were definitely the most perfect savory and sweet tofu pudding he had ever made. Regardless of whether it was the making of the tofu pudding, the mixing of the syrup and sauce, they were all perfect. The faint fragrance of the tofu pudding and the sauce wafted in the air, and he couldn't help but swallow his saliva. Those who liked sweet tofu pudding would be more interested in the sweet tofu pudding on the left. After all, even he had a slight desire to try the tofu pudding when he smelled the faint fragrance of the tofu pudding and the sweet but not greasy fragrance. Meg was a little nervous as he waited for the system's evaluation, but also a little expectant. When it came to cooking, the system had no intention of negotiating at all. This was one of his bottom lines. Meg also didn't want to use other means to complete the mission. He wanted every dish to be perfect. That was his attitude. The system was silent for a while before saying, according to the host's requirements, the evaluation results are as follows. 1. Color of the tofu pudding, white as jade, without any impurities achieved. 2. Texture of the tofu pudding, tender as fat, melts in the mouth, with a faint fragrance of beans achieved. 3. Side dishes, fresh and refreshing, well-matched achieved. 4. Sauce, translucent orange-red, refreshing and delicious, fragrant but not greasy achieved. Savory tofu pudding. The host didn't have any requirements for sweet tofu pudding in his previous life, but according to the system's evaluation, sweet tofu pudding has reached the level of savory tofu pudding. All 4 requirements have been met. Congratulations to the host for successfully learning how to make savory and sweet tofu pudding. Mission accomplished. Phew. Meg heaved a long sigh of relief, and a gratified smile appeared on his face. Since he had managed to meet the requirements of his previous life, his continuous efforts over the past few days had not been in vain. Next, he could make a delicious tofu pudding for Amy for breakfast. A bowl of savory tofu pudding and a largi ruggiamo for breakfast. It was a perfect match. System, hurry up and let me go out to find it. I want to soak the soybeans. Meg didn't argue with the system. He looked at the savory tofu pudding on the table and wanted to give it a try. However, he forced himself to look away. All the scenes suddenly disappeared. Meg, who was lying on the bed, suddenly opened his eyes. Lying on the bed for a while, he turned on the bedside lamp and looked at the alarm clock. It was already 2:00 in the morning. Looks like I can make breakfast before the grand opening and give Amy a little surprise. A smile appeared on Meg's face. He got out of bed quietly, put on a coat, and prepared to go downstairs. Mother, is that you? Are you waiting for me? At this moment, Remi suddenly murmured. Meg's footsteps paused, and he slowly walked over to the bed. Amy was lying on the bed with her lips slightly pouted. Her eyes were closed, and her long eyelashes were trembling slightly. She looked a little surprised, but also a little conflicted and upset. But, I don't even know what you look like. Can you turn around and let me see you? Just once, just once. Amy's voice became even more aggrieved. She raised her little hand outside the quilt as if she wanted to grab onto something. Meg gently held Amy's little hand, and his big warm hand wrapped around her little one. Good girl, Amy. Father is here. I'm here. Meg's heart sank. Although he had tried very hard to give her all his love and warmth, it seemed that she still missed her mother. After all, Amy was only a 4-year-old child. Other children could snuggle up in their mother's arms and act spoiled, but she had never seen her mother. Ugly Duckling had woken up at some point, and it also let out a soft cry. It licked Amy's arm through her clothes, and it also seemed to be a little worried. Father. Amy slowly calmed down after her little hand was wrapped in Meg's big warm hand. She murmured to herself before falling asleep again. What happened back then? Where is she now? Meg put Amy's hand under the quilt and tucked it in. He stroked Ugly Duckling's head with furrowed brows. He stood by the bed in silence for a while. He looked at Amy's face, and secretly clenched his fists as he murmured to himself, "All right, I didn't want to get too involved with what happened back then, but it looks like I have to find Amy's mother. If she could be by her side, Amy would be happier than she is right now, right? Little girl, you've already learned to hide your feelings at such a young age. You're so sensible that it makes my heart ache." Meg went downstairs, and tried hard to recall his memories of the elven princess. However, he didn't know if Meg Alex had erased them himself, or if those people had tampered with his memories, but his memories of the elven princess were completely blank. He couldn't remember her voice, her appearance, or even her name. He only knew that she was the elven princess, and Amy's biological mother. From what those people did, I can tell that she was most likely forced. Otherwise, there would be no need for such a huge commotion to sever ties between the two of them. Meg pulled out a pen and paper from the counter, and wrote down a few names and powers on the paper. Meg Alex was a very proud man. If she wanted to sever ties with him, then he definitely wouldn't turn back. If others tried to force them apart, then that was his fate. However, even though he was on the brink of death, he still managed to save the lives of 2 9th-tier knights, 3 9th-tier demons, and a 10th-tier magic caster. That was his glorious battle as the most powerful 9th-tier Griffin Knight on the Norland continent. Meg Alex, the Elven Princess, the royal family of the Empire, Magus Tower, elves, demons. Meg recited softly. These were the people and powers involved in that incident. Meg Alex had analyzed them after the incident, so he was able to look through his memories. The second prince was most likely the one who instigated this. The king of the Roth Empire had 4 sons. The third prince had a crippled right leg, and the fourth prince was only 7 years old. As such, the first prince, who was 30 years old, and the second prince, who was 26 years old, were both candidates for the throne. The first prince had a good relationship with the military. He had been in the military for many years, and had even fought alongside Meg Alex at the border. They seemed to have a good relationship, and the military as a whole was inclined to support him. Meanwhile, the second prince, who had decent magic talent, had grown up in the Magus Tower. It was said that he referred to all the magic casters in the Magus Tower as his teacher, and claimed to be the disciple of all the magic casters who worshipped him. He was also very respectful to normal magic casters, and had won the hearts of the magic casters. As such, the two of them could be said to be evenly matched in this battle for the throne. No one dared to say what the outcome would be. At this critical juncture, Meg Alex, who had slain many dragons on his griffin and saved the people from calamity, had completely overshadowed the status of magic casters in the hearts of the people. In fact, he was even renowned across the entire continent. Chapter 114. Dragon-slaying warrior, Griffin Knight, Great General of the Empire. Meg Alex stood at the center of the storm with so many glorious titles. Both sides were equally matched, so his choice was basically the final decision. Even the king would consider the decision of this young general who was slowly becoming a pillar of the empire's military. It wasn't difficult for most people to guess his choice. No matter how they looked at it, there was no way that Meg Alex would choose to side with the second prince. The military and the Magus Tower had always hated each other, and the first prince had always been supportive of the military. He also had a good reputation among the marshals. With Meg's support, the balance of this battle for the throne seemed to be leaning toward the first prince's side. If that guy isn't in a hurry to act, it's hard to say who he'll choose. Meg tapped his pen between the second prince and the first prince. In his memory, the second prince gave off a very gentle feeling, while the first prince was too battle-hungry. However, he lacked intelligence, so he wasn't a good candidate to be the next king. Moreover, after that incident, the actions of the first prince's faction made him even more disappointed. They only sought to maximize the benefits of this matter, and no one cared about the safety of the father and daughter. It was similar to his evaluation of the first prince, heartless and unjust. As for the elven race, it was most likely the elven queen's orders. Otherwise, no one would have been able to take Amy away from the elven princess. The high-tier elven magic caster who appeared that day wasn't someone who could be easily mobilized. As for the demons, they were probably high-tier fighters hired by both sides to confuse the public and take the blame. After all, the entire incident was blamed on the demons. All the demons in Rodu were arrested and exiled after a thorough investigation. Both sides were at loggerheads, and a second large-scale war was about to erupt. The demon lord was probably going to vomit blood after being screwed over by those demons. As for why Meg didn't die even though all his meridians had been severed, the most important factor was probably Amy and the missing Princess Elven. As the only heir to the throne of the elven race, her status was even nobler than the second prince's. Even the elven queen had to take her feelings into consideration. She must be in the Wind Forest right now. I don't know if she's in seclusion or if she's trapped. She shouldn't be in any danger before the elf tribe finds a better successor. Meg drew a circle around the elf princess. Even with Meg Alex's strength, he was still in such a pitiful state. It wasn't easy for him to escape the surveillance of those people and come here, so naturally, he couldn't just go straight to her and expose his identity. He had to find an opportunity to find out more about the elves and her, and then see if there was a chance for Amy to meet her. If it wasn't for Amy missing her, Meg didn't want to get involved in this mess. But when he recalled Amy's aggrieved look, he couldn't bear to let her be sad and disappointed. The little girl was so sensible. When she was young, she once asked Meg where his mother went, but Meg didn't answer, so she didn't ask again. It turned out that he didn't forget, but hid it in the bottom of his heart. I'll dress up on my next day off and find a private detective agency to get some information about the elves. If I don't remember anything, I'll just have to get to know them again. Meg looked at the piece of paper in his hand. He put a cross on the Mage Tower, the first prince, the second prince, and the elven queen. Although he wasn't in a hurry to avenge Meg Alex, if there was a chance in the future, he didn't mind setting them up. He still remembered that someone suggested to kill him and Amy together that night. They better not give me the chance. Although I'm not interested in being the emperor, it's more interesting to support the third prince, who's obsessed with carpentry, than to let those two assholes take the throne. Meg curled his lips. He tore the piece of paper off, lit a fire, and threw it into the trash can. Watching it slowly turn to ashes, he turned around and walked towards the kitchen. There was a new pulping machine on the stove, and the second by G bread oven he bought from the system was also in place. Fortunately, when the system designed the restaurant, it left a lot of space in the kitchen. There were many empty seats. Now that all the kitchen utensils were added, it didn't feel crowded at all. Moreover, the utensils weren't fixed in place. They could be put away when they weren't needed. Meg walked to the refrigerator and took a look. The soybeans and other ingredients were already prepared. In this regard, the system was quite reliable. As for the price, Meg wasn't worried. In any case, the price was only 2 or 3 times the price of the ingredients. It was fine as long as he made more money than the system. Meg soaked the soybeans in a large bowl. Originally, he had only planned to make 2 servings and try it with Amy first. After hesitating for a moment, he grabbed a few more handfuls of soybeans, turned off the light, and went upstairs to sleep. Master Crassus, are you really going to build a magic lab in Chaos City? In an elegant room lit by an oil lamp, a thin middle-aged man was looking at Crassus, who was sitting at a desk and sketching something seriously. There was a small black tower badge on his chest. That was the symbol of the Roth Empire's Holy Tower. That's right, Arthur. Go back to Rodu first thing in the morning tomorrow and ask them to send all the things I need as soon as possible. Also, send all the things I have stored to me, untouched, Crassus said without looking up. He paused for a moment, and then put down his pen. He turned to Arthur with a serious expression, and said, "By the way, tell those old geezers that if one of the things I want is missing, I'll go back and tear down a floor of the Magus Tower. If 36 of them are missing, there won't be a Magus Tower in the Empire anymore." "Yes." Arthur hurriedly nodded. He looked at Crassus, who had turned back to his drawing. He had been serving Master Crassus for 20 years. Perhaps very few people remembered this white-haired magic caster, but he was the only great magic caster in the Magus Tower who dared to fight a giant dragon in close combat with his staff. He had joined the Magus Tower at the age of 18, and was now over 120 years old. He had been serving Master Crassus since his grandfather's generation, and had been influenced by him since he was a child. He knew that Crassus lived on the 18th floor not because he was the 18th in the Magus Tower, but because he liked the number 18. If he wanted to, he could live on the 36th floor as well. 100 years ago, he was just as famous as General Alex had been a few years ago, and he had contributed greatly to the rapid rise of the Magus Tower's status over the past decade or so. It was just that he was past his prime. Arthur followed him all the way to the south to recruit disciples, but he didn't expect to stop here. It seemed that Crassus was planning to settle down here for the rest of his life, which made him feel a little complicated. "Go. Prepare a carriage for me tomorrow morning. I want to go to Amy's early," said Crassus. "Yes," Arthur replied and quietly went out. The light in the room flickered. After a long time, Crassus put down his pen and looked at the design of the magic room on the paper. A smile appeared on his old face. He got up and walked to the window. He looked at the half-hidden stars under the dark clouds and sighed to himself. "Back then, Irina said that she would give birth to a daughter to be my disciple. I would teach her the most powerful magic and build the most beautiful magic room. Unfortunately, I'm afraid my body won't be able to wait until then. Fortunately, I've found a good little fellow. I just don't know if that little fellow will like it. .. Chapter 115. In a huge cave, there was a tree that was more than 100 meters tall. Its trunk was as thick as a dozen people hugging it. Countless branches began to branch out from the 50-meter-tall tree. Like a willow tree, thousands of thin and soft branches drooped down, almost filling the entire empty cave. Every branch had countless green heart-shaped leaves, which emitted a warm light green glow in the dark. They were full of vitality, and as the branches swayed slightly, they lit up the entire cave. There were also specks of fireflies dancing among the branches, making the cave look like a fairyland. Under this tree stood a woman in a white dress, looking up at a firefly perched on a leaf. Her long silver hair cascaded down her back, and her skin was fairer than snow. Her eyebrows were as delicate as a painting, and there was a small golden moon mark between her eyebrows. Her small pointy ears were white and thin, and seemed to be able to pass through light. Her brows were slightly furrowed, as if she was thinking about something. The branches around her automatically parted to the sides, as if they were afraid of her, but also seemed to want to get close to her. "Your Highness Irina." At this moment, a crisp voice sounded from outside the cave, and an elven girl in a green dress quickly ran into the cave. The branches along the way seemed to be deliberately teasing her, constantly scraping her face and body. It took her a lot of effort to reach Irina. She was panting, but she couldn't hide the joy on her face. Irina was still staring at the firefly, and calmly asked, "Beansprout, what are you so happy about?" "Your Highness, didn't you say last time that you wouldn't use this nickname for me in the future?" Phyllis's face fell, and she looked at Irina, who was standing under the tree of life, with a helpless expression. Although everyone around Her Highness had all kinds of strange nicknames, Beansprout was too unpleasant to hear. Irina turned her head, and stared at Phyllis's chest. She nodded seriously, and said, "All right, Beansprout, but your chest has become smaller again. If this continues, it will become a pit. Your Highness, I'm still young. I'll grow up in the future," Phyllis said confidently after looking down at herself. "I was already this big when I was 18, Irina looked into Phyllis's eyes and shook her head. "I haven't changed since then. Your Highness, it's all right. I can hold on." Phyllis bit her lip as she tried to suppress her grief. It's okay. It's quite boring. If you want to cry, you can go to the side and cry for me. Irina smiled. Phyllis fell silent upon hearing this. She wanted to laugh and cry at the same time. As expected, she was so angry every time she spoke to His Highness, but she had no way to vent her frustrations. All of a sudden, her eyes lit up, and she said, "Your Highness, I'm here to deliver some news to you." "There's news from Rodu. What is it?" Irina raised an eyebrow as she looked at Phyllis, and her voice involuntarily rose a few octaves. Phyllis knew that this was a sign of Her Highness' serious expression, and she replied in a quiet voice, "Snar sent back a secret report today. During the past 3 months, he's confirmed that he and the young mistress are most likely still alive. He used his talent to reconstruct the scenes around the fire scene, and he said that he'll report the details to you in person." "All right." Irina nodded with an expressionless face, but her fists were clenched tightly. She waved a hand at Phyllis, and said, "If there's nothing else, you can go now. I don't want to see you cry right now. There's one more thing. Mistress Helena proposed to the Queen yesterday that we elect another elven princess as the heir. This time, she's recommending young Mistress Sally." Phyllis was a little concerned as she looked at Irina. "That old witch Helena's got a good eye this time. Slug is a good little girl. She used to follow me around a lot when I was a child." Irina nodded, but her voice suddenly became a little cold as she said, "But that old witch seems to be in a hurry to get on her way. Doesn't she know that if I want her to die, no one will be able to stop me?" The Tree of Life seemed to have sensed the change in her mood, and its branches began to sway as well. Phyllis lowered her head and didn't dare to say anything. Ever since Irina turned 18, the holy tree of the elven race had only obeyed her wishes. Here, she was invincible. Irina quickly calmed herself down, and said, "You can go now." "Yes." Phyllis nodded before quickly making her way toward the entrance of the cave. The branches of the Tree of Life parted to create a path for her to quickly pass through. The sound of the stone door closing rang out, and the cave fell silent again. "Amy. Meg. Where are you two?" A murmur sounded in the quiet cave, and all of the branches of the Tree of Life floated upward, extending toward the sky like endless strands of hair. Countless fireflies gathered together and circled around Irina like a ribbon. Standing alone under the tree, she appeared to be a little lonely. The next morning, Meg woke up. Amy and Ugly Duckling were still sleeping soundly. Meg gently kissed Amy's forehead. If her mother could kiss her, she would be very happy, right? After standing and watching for a while, Meg went downstairs to prepare the ingredients. As usual, Yarbemia arrived at a little past 5 a.m. "Good morning, Mr. Mac." Yarbemia greeted Meg with a smile. Her smile was full of energy, and she didn't seem tired at all from yesterday's intensive work and waking up early. "Good morning, MIA. Didn't I tell you to come to the restaurant later?" Meg nodded and glanced at the half-eaten biscuit in her hand. "I'm used to waking up early, and I can't sleep, so I wanted to come early to help. I'll go to the restaurant after I finish eating." Yarbemia was a little embarrassed as she hurriedly stuffed the biscuit into her mouth. Because she ate too quickly, the biscuit got stuck in her throat, and she coughed a few times, her face a little red. "Come in, I'll get you some water," Meg said a little helplessly. He turned around and poured a glass of water for Yarbemia, who was still coughing. "Thank you." Yarbemia took 2 sips of the water and heaved a sigh of relief. She looked a little embarrassed. "Then take a seat first. I don't need your help for now, but I'll be making a new dish in a while. Maybe you can help me taste it." Meg smiled. He was already a good boss with such a salary and benefits during the probation period. When he wasn't in a hurry to save money next month, he could consider increasing Yarbemia's benefits. After all, this little girl was quite diligent. Yesterday, the restaurant's turnover increased by 30%, and his workload decreased by a lot. He had picked up a treasure. If she were an ordinary waiter, 2 of them wouldn't be able to be so efficient. "Okay." Although Yarbemia wanted to help, she looked at Meg's back and swallowed her words. She didn't have the confidence to help Meg do anything. Such delicious and magical food could only be made by his magical hands. Chapter 116. The soaked soybeans were almost ready. Meg prepared the ingredients for the ruggiamo while grinding the soybeans in the grinder. He turned around and glanced at Yarbemia. He had put in more soybeans yesterday, so she could try the new dish and see if it suited the tastes of the people in this world. He put the ground soy milk into the pot, and the faint smell of soybeans drifted out of the kitchen. It smells so good. Yarbemia's eyes lit up. The aroma of soybeans in the air reminded her of when she was a child. Her mother would soak soybeans in a bowl for a night, add some oil and salt, and cook them in a pot. Soon, the aroma of soybeans would fill the air. The soybeans cooked in this way were fragrant and sweet. However, she hadn't eaten them for many years. Could it be that Mag's new dish was boiled soybeans? After ordering the tofu pudding, pouring the prepared syrup and sauce over it, and sprinkling the savory tofu pudding with all kinds of side dishes, Meg walked out of the kitchen with 2 bowls of tofu pudding. He placed them in front of Yarbemia and said with a smile, "The new dish is tofu pudding. Please try it." Tofu pudding? Yarbemia's eyes lit up as she looked at the 2 white porcelain bowls in front of her. There was something as white and soft as jade in each of the white porcelain bowls. When it was placed on the table, it wobbled slightly. It looked very elastic and very adorable. The bowl on the left was covered with fragrant syrup, while the bowl on the right was filled with all types of chopped side dishes. The faint aroma of tofu pudding and syrup wafted toward her, and she couldn't help but swallow as her gaze fell on the bowl of sweet tofu pudding with orange syrup, and she was unable to look away. The bowl on the left has sweet tofu pudding, and the bowl on the right has savory tofu pudding. "You can choose according to your taste," Meg said. Judging from Yarbemia's expression, it wasn't hard to guess the result. "But, it's not noon yet." Yarbemia looked between Meg and the tofu pudding in front of her. She was a little hesitant. This is a new dish that hasn't been officially sold yet. Tasting is also one of the jobs of the restaurant staff. "You can choose." Meg shook his head with a smile. Naturally, he could guess her thoughts. Yarbemia's eyes lit up. She didn't expect that her job would include trying out new products. Although both bowls of tofu pudding looked delicious, the one on the left was clearly more appealing. She looked up at Meg and asked, "Then, can I choose the sweet one?" "Of course." Meg nodded with a smile, but he was feeling a little frustrated. He had never tasted tofu pudding before, yet he had chosen the sweet tofu pudding. But now, as the owner of the restaurant, he had decided not to participate in the dispute between the 2 parties. And now, he really began to try to understand everyone's different tastes. For example, Morbai ate Youngju fried rice every day without ever tasting a second ruggiamo. Sajaras only ate ruggiamo from the beginning to the end. This was something that he had seen with his own eyes after becoming the owner of the restaurant, and he had gradually come to understand it. Furthermore, the restaurant was going to sell both sweet and savory tofu pudding in the future, so it was completely within his expectations that there would be more customers who liked sweet tofu pudding. However, unlike in his previous life, where there was an accumulation of differences between the North and the South, the conflict between savory and sweet tofu pudding shouldn't be too exaggerated in this world. After receiving Meg's permission, Yarbemia carefully placed the sweet tofu pudding in front of her. She gently picked up the white spoon beside her and slowly dug in from the corner. It was like egg custard, but more springy. She dug into the tofu pudding that was covered by the golden red syrup with the spoon. The cut was as white as jade, but it was soon covered by the sticky syrup again. She slowly dug in a spoonful. The tofu pudding was wrapped in the crystal clear syrup and slightly shook in the spoon. It was as delicate as a piece of art. "It's so beautiful." Yarbemia was a little entranced by the sight of the tofu pudding, but she couldn't help but put it into her mouth. The tender tofu pudding melted almost as soon as it entered her mouth, and the syrup that was wrapped around the tofu pudding was so rich and sweet that she couldn't help but close her eyes. What a sweet taste. This feeling of happiness made her feel as if she had suddenly fallen into a pool filled with candy. As long as she stretched out her hand, she would be able to grab the sweetest and most delicious candy. This had been her childhood dream. However, since she was young, candy had always been a luxury to her. There were too many days when she was hungry and did not even dare to hope for a sweet feeling. A tear rolled down Yarbemia's face and dripped onto the table. This feeling of happiness made her unable to control her emotions. She swallowed a mouthful of tofu pudding, but it didn't taste sweet at all. There was a faint taste of tofu pudding in her mouth, and it was sweet but not greasy. She opened her eyes and stared at the small bowl in front of her. She couldn't help but put another spoonful of tofu pudding into her mouth. The feeling of happiness was pushed to the peak by spoonful after spoonful. Ding! The spoon hit the bottom of the bowl, and Yarbemia opened her eyes. There was only a little orange syrup left in the bowl, and she faltered slightly upon seeing that she had already finished all of the tofu pudding. She couldn't help but lick the bottom of the bowl. The sweet syrup was simply too alluring. Was it good? Meg asked with an expectant look on his face. He could already guess the answer from Yarbemia's actions. The tofu pudding's debut in this world seemed to be quite good. Yes, it's super delicious. It's so sweet and soft, it's so delicious. Yarbemia put down the bowl with a blush on her face. She had already embarrassed herself by licking the plate 2 days ago, but the taste was simply too alluring, and she couldn't help but lick the bowl again. However, she still nodded vigorously. She paused momentarily before stroking her own face with elation. Also, my face feels cool, and my skin seems to have become even more supple. Does it have cosmetic effects as well? Meg was also a little surprised to hear this. He had been looking forward to seeing what additional effects the tofu pudding would have, but he didn't think that it would have cosmetic effects. This was an irresistible temptation for women, and if the tofu pudding's cosmetic effects were common, then it was entirely possible that it would become a must-order dish for all female customers. Do you want to try the salty one? Meg asked. Perhaps Yarbemia had only tasted the sweet tofu pudding first, and that was why Yarbemia found the sweet tofu pudding to be delicious. Perhaps she would be able to find her true faith after tasting the salty one. Chapter 117. That's a familiar tone. Mag raised an eyebrow. He had heard many similar comments on the internet in the past. He had expected someone to say it, but he didn't expect to hear it from Yarbemia first. Don't be so sure. Meg shook his head with a smile. He didn't think that the restaurant would have so many different tastes before the tofu pudding had even been released. However, he wasn't in a hurry to argue with Yarbemia. Instead, he sat down and picked up the bowl of savory tofu pudding from the table. The side dishes were all made according to his taste. The orange sauce was poured over the tender white tofu pudding, and he chopped up the pickled vegetables, sprinkled coriander, garlic, chopped green onions, and dripped 2 drops of sesame oil on top. The tofu pudding was still steaming hot. He scooped up a spoonful of tofu pudding and put it into his mouth. The tofu pudding slid down his tongue, and the flavor of the savory sauce and tofu pudding instantly fused together. A few simple side dishes were the finishing touches. Together with the sweet tofu pudding, it tasted so refreshing and delicious. After swallowing, the faint flavor of the tofu pudding lingered in his mouth for a long time. It was delicious but not greasy. This is even better than the Bai Ji tofu pudding on the Tianqiao Bridge in Nancheng City. This is the best tofu pudding can do. Meg's eyes completely lit up, and he couldn't stop eating. 3 minutes later, he slowly put down the spoon in his hand and looked at the empty bowl with a satisfied expression. A bowl of savory tofu pudding in the morning is really satisfying. It would be even better if it was paired with a rujiamo. Mia likes sweet tofu pudding, and I like savory tofu pudding. Now, it's time to see if Amy likes sweet or savory. Father, Amy is hungry. Right at this moment, Amy's voice sounded from behind him. She had come downstairs with Ugly Duckling in her arms. She sniffed with her little nose and looked at Meg with curiosity in her eyes. Father, is there something new today? Meg looked back at Amy, who had put on her dress, and stood up with a smile. Yes, there's something new today. Amy, have a seat, and I'll get you a bowl of tofu pudding. Do you want something sweet or savory? Tofu pudding? Salty or sweet? Mi's face showed a bit of hesitation. Amy, the sweet tofu pudding is super delicious. It's sweet and full of bliss, Yarbemia couldn't help but suggest. He's even using the great grass planting technique. Meg, who had been waiting for Amy to make her own choice, raised his eyebrows and thought about how to describe the savory tofu pudding's mesmerizing taste. Really? But the salty one must be super delicious too. Amy's eyes lit up. She looked at Meg and asked, "Father, can I have both?" Of course. Meg was stunned for a moment before a smile appeared on his face. That's right, this was Amy's choice. Under such circumstances, it was absolutely impossible to choose between the two. He just didn't know which flavor she would like more after eating it. All right, thank you, Father. Amy happily skipped over to the table with Ugly Duckling in her arms. She sat down at the table and opened her bright blue eyes wide with anticipation as she looked at Meg. She didn't know what tofu pudding was, but as long as it was made by her father, it would definitely be super delicious. Meg went into the kitchen, and soon came out with 2 bowls of tofu pudding. He placed them gently on the table, and said, "The one on the left is sweet, and the one on the right is savory. Which one would you like to have first, Meg?" Yarbemia was also looking at Amy with anticipation in her eyes. She could tell that Mr. Mac preferred the savory tofu pudding, while she felt that the sweet tofu pudding had to be the most delicious food in the world. As such, she naturally hoped that Amy would like it as well. "It smells so good." Amy fanned the opening of the bowl with her little hand, and her little face was filled with elation. Meow, meow. Tilda Ugly Duckling in Amy's arms also opened its mouth and let out a few meows. It crawled up against Amy's hand, wanting to see what was in the bowl. "Don't look, Ugly Duckling. It's mine." Amy reached out and pressed Ugly Duckling's little head back down. Meow. Ugly Duckling looked up at Amy with a pitiful expression, its sapphire eyes filled with resentment. However, Amy completely ignored it as she looked at the 2 bowls. The white tofu pudding looked as if it had been made from snow, and both of them looked so adorable. She hesitated momentarily before moving the savory tofu pudding closer to her and picking up a small spoon. This is a victory for the savory side. A smile appeared on Meg's face. Sure enough, his daughter's tastes were just like his. As long as Amy tries the sweet tofu pudding, she'll definitely like it too. Yarbemia was a little disappointed, but she wasn't discouraged. She was determined. "I'm going to eat it." Amy scooped up a spoonful of tofu pudding. The white tofu pudding was wrapped in orange-red sauce, and there was a bit of chopped pickled mustard on top. The tofu pudding looked very springy as it swayed in the spoon. She opened her mouth and put it into her mouth. The sweet tofu pudding, the savory mustard, and the sauce blended perfectly together, and her eyes immediately lit up. She swallowed it with a soft gulp. Amy's little face was filled with joy as she looked up at Meg, who was full of anticipation. She nodded her little head and said, "Father, the tofu pudding is delicious, but can I have a ruggiamo to go with it?" "Sure, I'll make it for you." Meg nodded. He also thought that the savory tofu pudding would go well with ruggiamo, but he didn't expect Amy to ask for ruggiamo before he even said anything. Foodies are really talented. Is it really that delicious? Yarbemia was a little skeptical as she looked at Amy, who was happily eating another spoonful of tofu pudding. However, her eyes fell on the bowl of sweet tofu pudding next to her, and her gaze became firm again. Sweet tofu pudding is the best. The baiji bread was already in the oven, and the braised meat was already cooked. Soon, 2 ruggiamos were made, and a savory tofu pudding was made for herself. Amy took a bite of the ruggiamo, and then a bite of the tofu pudding. Her eyes were wide open, and her little face was filled with happiness. Her body was also swaying from side to side, and she looked very happy. Ugly Duckling's head swayed from side to side as Amy ate, and its eyes were filled with longing. Meg also had a smile on his face. At least for now, it seemed that Amy liked savory tofu pudding. There were a few more urgent knocks on the door. Meg looked at his watch. It was only 7 o'clock, and he wasn't going to open the door. Chapter 118. Meg put down his ruggiamo, walked to the door, and opened it. A tall, thin man in a black robe and a black hat that almost covered his eyes stood at the door. Hearing the door open, he looked sideways at Meg and said nervously in a low voice, "May I come in?" Meg looked at the familiar face and nodded. He stepped aside to let him in and closed the door behind him. This was the boss of the private detective agency he had visited the day before yesterday. He had asked him to investigate Crassus and Julian. The boss' name was Sherlock, which was why he had chosen this agency. He hadn't expected Sherlock to come to him in just 2 days. "Mr. Mac, this is the information you asked for. I don't know what you want, but I suggest you don't provoke these two." Sherlock took out a paper bag and handed it to Meg. He glanced at Yarbemia and Amy in the dining room and lowered his voice again. "It's not hard to get information on Crassus. It's very detailed, and it's worth the price you paid. But I didn't find much information on the magician next door. When he entered the magic potion shop last night, half of his hair was burned. He's a very powerful magician." I glanced at Sherlock's short burnt hair that was exposed from the edge of his hat. 2 days ago, Sherlock had long, curly hair, a moustache, and an unrestrained smile. It was a stark contrast to Sherlock's cautious and slightly white hair. I wondered what Sherlock had experienced the previous night. "Okay, thank you." Meg nodded and squeezed the paper bag in his hand. There seemed to be a lot of information. It should be enough for him to determine how dangerous Crassus and Julian were. Sherlock, who had long, flowing hair, had done his best. "Then I'll take my leave." Sherlock nodded and prepared to leave. But when his eyes fell on Amy, who was eating a Ruggiamo, he couldn't help but stop. He had seen the little girl 2 days ago. She was delicate and adorable. Now, she was chewing on a weird-looking biscuit, and scooping up a spoonful of white and tender food from the bowl from time to time. She was eating with relish. The aroma of braised meat and beans in the air made him swallow involuntarily. He had been in a hurry to deliver the ingredients to Mag before he opened the magic potion shop, so he hadn't had breakfast yet. When he smelled this tempting aroma, his stomach began to growl unconsciously. "Mr. Mac, can we start selling breakfast now?" Sherlock asked Meg. "There's still half an hour before the opening, so we don't serve breakfast yet." Meg shook his head, but there was a strange smile on his face. He had paid Sherlock 10 gold coins as a commission. If he used that money to eat in the restaurant, it wouldn't even be enough for 2 bowls of Yangju fried rice. He wondered how Sherlock would feel about his flowing hair. "Okay, I guess I'll have to come again next time. Goodbye." Sherlock nodded. He took another look at the Ruggiamo in Amy's hand and opened the door. Meg locked the door and sat down at the table by the door. He took out the information in the paper bag and quickly browsed through it. His brows furrowed, then slowly relaxed. Finally, he became hesitant. The information on Crassus was indeed very detailed. From when he was young, to when he left Rhodu and went all the way south to Chaos City, there was a record of where he lived now. But after all, he was a magic caster worshipped by the imperial family. The fact that Sherlock could get such information meant that he had a good source of information. From this information, he could basically rule out the connection between Crassus and that incident. This made him feel relieved. As long as he didn't belong to that faction, Crassus was much less dangerous. What concerned Meg more was that Crassus had a relationship with the elven princess. It seemed that he wanted to take her as his disciple, but the matter was left unsettled. Therefore, he should be kind to the elven princess. The information on Julian was much less. It only said that he was a mysterious magic caster who had opened this magic potion shop in the Aiden Square for nearly 10 years. The business of the magic potion shop had been lukewarm. It produced all kinds of low-level magic potions, which could be sold in bulk. Therefore, many adventurers would buy some basic potions from him. He was very low-key. However, Sherlock mentioned that Julian might have some grudges with Crassus, but it was only briefly mentioned. Maybe he didn't know enough, or he was afraid of Crassus. If that's the case, Crassus is less dangerous than the mysterious Julian. Meg frowned. According to the information, Crassus wanted to find a disciple to inherit his legacy. He was already 121 years old, and his life was coming to an end. Therefore, finding a disciple was more important to him than anything else. He knew that Amy was a half-elf, but he still wanted to take her as his disciple. It was clear that taking a disciple was more important to him than anything else, even if it was the doubts of the secular world and the problems that might arise in the Magus Tower. If he really wants to take Amy as his disciple, but doesn't want to go to the Magus Tower. Meg's mind began to run wild. Father, the savory tofu pudding is delicious. Amy's happy voice interrupted Meg's thoughts. He smiled and put the information back into the paper bag. He got up and walked over. Amy had already finished her Ruggiamo and savory tofu pudding. She raised her head, and her eyebrows were like crescent moons. Is Amy's favorite savory tofu pudding? Meg asked with a smile as he reached out and gently wiped away a bit of tofu pudding from the corner of her mouth. But I also want to try that sweet tofu pudding. I think it'll be super delicious too. Amy shook her head. Her eyes were shining as she looked at the tofu pudding with golden red syrup. When I'm almost full, I'll have a sweet tofu pudding like a dessert. It'll definitely feel great. Okay, then you can try it. Meg nodded. He was a little exasperated by Amy's eagerness to eat any delicacy, but what could he do? She was so adorable even when she wanted to eat sweet tofu pudding. He carefully moved the bowl of sweet tofu pudding toward her. A look of anticipation appeared on Yabemia's face. She had thought that Amy wouldn't eat sweet tofu pudding because she liked savory tofu pudding, but it appeared that wasn't the case. Perhaps she would fall in love with sweet tofu pudding. Amy scooped a spoonful of sweet tofu pudding into her mouth and closed her big blue eyes. The tofu pudding was coated in syrup and it melted in her mouth, filling her mouth with sweetness. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.